enjoying his attention? The question came out low and quiet, but it hit Livia like a hand pressed flat against her chest. She turned. Matteo De Luca was standing 2 feet behind her, holding nothing, watching everything. Not her dress, not the room, her face. The way it had looked 30 seconds ago when she'd thrown her head back and laughed at something another man said. His expression was controlled. It was always controlled. But his eyes were doing something she had never seen in 5 years. Something that had nothing to do with business. Something that looked exactly like a man who had just realized far too late that he was already lost. Before we go further, if this story is already pulling you in, please subscribe to the channel and follow along all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The party had been Rosa Gentile's idea. Rosa was the head of corporate communications for De Luca International, and she had spent 3 weeks convincing Matteo that the company needed a proper celebration, not a boardroom dinner, not a rooftop cocktail hour for 12 executives who all secretly hated each other, but a real event. Music, open bar, 200 guests, the kind of night that made people feel good about working for a company they were quietly terrified of. Matteo had said no 4 times. Livia had said, "Just let Rosa have the party, Matteo. You can stand in the corner looking forbidding, and everyone will still think it was your idea." He had said yes on the 5th ask. That was the thing about Livia Romano that nobody in the building fully understood. She was 32 years old. Matteo had originally hired her at 27, fresh from her 2nd master's degree, and carrying a leather portfolio so overstuffed with references that it had actually spilled open onto his desk during the interview. She had looked at the papers scattered across his mahogany desk and said without missing a beat, "I'll take that as a sign I brought too many." Then she had gathered everything back up with calm, efficient hands and looked him straight in the eye and said, "You should hire me because I'm the only person who walked into this building today and didn't look nervous when they said your name downstairs." He had hired her the same afternoon. In 5 years, she had become the one person in his professional life he was incapable of intimidating. Everyone else who worked for De Luca International operated at a low-grade frequency of fear. Not terror. Matteo didn't allow incompetence, and incompetent people tended not to survive the first 90-day review, but a careful, calibrated awareness of exactly who they were working for. The legal businesses were real. The import company, the real estate holdings, the private equity fund. All of it was legitimate. All of it was profitable, and all of it was staffed by professionals who were very good at asking no questions about the parts of Matteo's world that lived in different rooms. But the rooms existed. Everyone in the building knew the rooms existed. Everyone smiled carefully, spoke carefully, and chose their words with the particular care of people who understood that certain mistakes were not correctable. Except Livia. Livia had walked into his office 14 months into her tenure and told him he was wrong, not carefully, not with an apologetic preamble. She had sat down across from his desk, placed a contract on the surface between them, and said, "This clause is going to cost you 3 times what you think you're saving, and whoever told you otherwise was either lying or didn't read it." The room had gone so quiet that Matteo had heard the ventilation system cycling in the ceiling. His assistant at the time, a young man named Patrick, who had lasted 8 months before finding calmer employment elsewhere, had visibly stopped breathing. Matteo had looked at Livia for a long moment. Then he had picked up the contract, read the clause, set it back down. "Send it back," he had said. "Get me the revision by Thursday." He had not thanked her. She had not expected him to. That was the beginning of something Matteo had never had a word for, because he had spent his entire adult life deliberately not developing vocabulary for things he couldn't control. The party was at the Aldine Club on East Monroe, and by 8 o'clock, the main hall was full enough that the noise had taken on its own texture, a thick layered hum of conversation and clinking glasses, and the string quartet Rosa had insisted on positioning near the east windows. Matteo arrived at 7:45, shook the required hands, said the required things, and positioned himself near the bar with a glass of scotch. He had no intention of finishing. Marco Esposito, who handled the more delicate logistics of Matteo's less public operations, materialized at his left shoulder within minutes. "Russo sent a message," Marco said, keeping his voice below the ambient noise. "He wants a meeting before the end of the month. Tell Russo I'm aware of what he wants. He said it's about the Lakeview situation. Tell Russo I'm still aware of what he wants." Matteo took a measured sip of his drink. "And tell him I'll reach out when I decide the conversation is worth having." Marco disappeared. Across the room, Matteo watched the crowd the way he always watched a room, cataloging exits, reading body language, identifying anyone who didn't belong. It was reflexive by now, as automatic as breathing, a habit so deeply embedded in his nervous system that he did it without conscious thought. That was how he noticed Livia. Not that noticing Livia required any particular effort. She had a quality that was difficult to name, precisely not conventional beauty, in the way that certain women at these events possessed it. The kind that was assembled with intention and expense and understood its own power. Livia's quality was something different. She moved through rooms as if she had somewhere specific to be, as if her attention were genuinely focused, rather than strategically deployed, and people responded to that without realizing why. Tonight she was wearing a dark burgundy dress that he had never seen before. Her hair was down, which it almost never was at the office. She was standing near the far edge of the room with a glass of white wine, talking to someone Matteo didn't immediately recognize. A man, 40 perhaps, well-built, casual in the way of someone who came from money but didn't feel the need to announce it. He was saying something, leaning slightly toward her, with the relaxed posture of a person who was genuinely enjoying the conversation and had no anxiety about whether it was going well. Livia laughed, not her polite laugh, the slight controlled smile she deployed in meetings when a client said something mildly amusing. This was different. Her head tilted back slightly. Her hand came up and touched her own collarbone. Her whole face changed, and for a moment she looked like someone who had completely forgotten to monitor herself. Matteo realized he had stopped moving. He was standing completely still, halfway between the bar and the center of the room, and he was watching Livia Romano laugh at something a man he didn't know had said, and something in his chest was doing something he didn't have a name for. He put the scotch glass down on the nearest surface. Who is he? Marco had reappeared with the particular efficiency of a man who understood that certain questions required immediate answers. "Daniel Carter," Marco said. He never asked why Matteo wanted to know things. He simply knew them. Commercial real estate, Midwest regional, clean record. I mean actually clean, not just clean on paper. He's a guest of Rosa Gentile's. Old college connection from what I can find. He works with us. No current business relationship with the company. Matteo looked across the room. Carter had said something else. Livia was smiling again, smaller this time, the kind of smile that meant she was actually thinking about something, not just being polite. "Keep the evening running," Matteo said. He walked toward them. He didn't announce himself. He simply moved through the crowd with the kind of unhurried authority that made people step aside without being asked. And then he was standing 2 feet behind Livia's left shoulder, and for approximately 3 seconds, she didn't know he was there. He watched her finish a sentence, watched Carter laugh, watched her reach forward to set her wine glass on a nearby table, and in the motion she half turned and saw him. Her expression shifted, not with fear, never with fear, which was one of the things that had always unsettled him slightly about her. The shift was something more like surprise, followed immediately by a flicker of something more complicated that she smoothed out in the space of half a second. "Matteo," she said, professional, steady. "Livia." He looked at Carter. Carter stuck out his hand with the easy confidence of someone who didn't know he should be more careful. "Daniel Carter, good event you've put together here." "I didn't put it together," Matteo said, shaking the hand. His grip was measured, not aggressive, simply precise. "That was our communications team." "Well, someone has good taste. Several people do." Matteo looked at Livia, enjoying his attention. The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, something shifted in Livia's face that Matteo couldn't fully read, and he was very good at reading people. He watched the flicker move through her eyes. Confusion first, then something sharper, then a decision. She smiled. The polite smile. The meeting smile. "Mr. Carter and I were discussing commercial real estate trends in the northern suburbs," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. "Apparently the zoning situation near Evanston has been interesting." Matteo looked at her for one more moment. "Enjoy the party," he said. He walked away. He didn't sleep that night. This was not in itself unusual. Matteo De Luca had not slept well since approximately the age of 19, which was when he had first fully understood the nature of the world he'd inherited and what it would cost him. Insomnia was a functional condition. At this point, he used the hours he managed, the hours he had structured his life so that the silence of 3 in the morning was simply another part of the day. But that night, he sat in the study of his Streeterville apartment with a glass of water and his thoughts arranged badly, and he could not make them arrange themselves better. Enjoying his attention. He turned the words over. He had said them quietly enough that Carter probably hadn't caught the exact phrasing. He had said them in the tone he used for observations, not accusations. But they weren't an observation. He knew what they were. He had been making them his entire adult life, the particular kind of statement that sounds like a question, but is actually a claim. A perimeter. The linguistic equivalent of standing very close to something and daring anyone else to come closer. The problem was that Livia wasn't something he owned. She wasn't even something he had ever allowed himself to think about owning, because he was not whatever else. He was a man who confused professional relationships with personal ones. He had specific and very clear categories. He kept them clear because clarity was the only thing that had kept him functional for 2 decades, and he was not interested in the kind of chaos that happened when the categories blurred. But he had stood in a room and watched her laugh, and something had happened. He picked up his phone at 2 in the morning and read through 3 months of emails between himself and Livia, looking for something he couldn't name. Looking maybe for the moment when this had stopped being simple. The emails were professional. Of course they were professional. They were always professional. But reading them in sequence at 2 in the morning, he started to notice the texture of them. The way hers were direct without being cold. The way she wrote to him the same way she spoke to him without the particular deference that everyone else applied to every interaction with him. A deference that had stopped feeling like respect 20 years ago and had started feeling like a kind of loneliness. At some point, he put the phone down. He did not identify what he was feeling. He simply sat with it, the way he sat with difficult problems, letting it exist without trying to solve it before he understood its shape. The morning after the party, Matteo arrived at the office at 7:48. Livia was already there. This was normal. She was almost always there before him, which he had stopped remarking on sometime in the 2nd year, because remarking on it had not changed anything. She was at her desk outside his office with a coffee in her hand and a file open in front of her, and she looked up when he came through the glass doors, the way she always looked up briefly, assessing, already calculating, what the first conversation of the day needed to cover. "Morning," she said. "You have the Hessler call at 9. The board pre-read is on your desk, and Carla from legal wants 20 minutes before noon. She said it's about the Harrison contract amendments." Fine. He walked past her into his office. He sat down. He opened the board pre-read. He read the same paragraph 4 times. He stood up and walked to the door. Livia. She appeared in the doorway. She was holding a pen and her small notebook, the olive green one she used for everything, which she had gone through 3 of in the time he'd known her. "Who did Carter leave with last night?" he asked. The pen stopped. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not offense, not confusion quite. Something more careful than either. "I don't know," she said. "I didn't track his exit." "Did you exchange contact information?" "Matteo." He waited. "That's not a question that belongs in this office." she said. The way she said it, quiet, direct, completely without heat, was somehow more forceful than if she had raised her voice. He had seen people shrink when he looked at them the way he was looking at her right now. She did not shrink. She simply held the space between them and waited for him to either come back to himself or commit to wherever he was going. "You're right," he said. "I know." She didn't say it unkindly. She went back to her desk. He sat back down. He read the board pre-read without incident. The Hessler call went long. By 10:30, Matteo had dealt with a supply chain complication on the legitimate side of things. That required 2 hours. He hadn't budgeted a call from his attorney about a regulatory matter in 2 separate jurisdictions, and a brief and characteristically unpleasant exchange with his younger brother Nico, who called from Milan to complain about a family matter that Matteo had been hoping to avoid for 3 weeks. He was short with Nico. He was short with his attorney. He was, if he was honest with himself, and he was generally honest with himself because the alternative was fatal in his particular line of work, operating at about 60% of his usual capacity, and the remaining 40% was somewhere in a conversation he'd had at a party the night before with a woman he paid a salary to. He called Marco at 11. "Carter," he said, "what do you need? Full background, business history, personal history, current relationships. Not the surface read, the real one." There was a pause. "You want this on Carter specifically, or is this about Carter?" Matteo said. "By when?" "Today." Another pause. "Okay." Matteo ended the call. He stood at his window. 41st floor, the lake visible in the distance, flat and gray under November clouds, and he examined what he had just done with the same methodical attention he would apply to any business decision. He had just ordered a background investigation on a commercial real estate developer from the North Shore because the man had made Livia laugh. He sat with that fact for approximately 10 seconds. Then he picked up the phone and called Marco back. "Cancel Carter." Cancel it. He set the phone down. He stood at the window for another minute. Then he walked to his office door and opened it. "Livia." She looked up. "When your day opens up today, whenever I'd like 20 minutes. She looked at her screen. "I have a gap at 3:15. 3:15. He closed the door. Sound. She came in at 3:17, which he had expected. She was rarely precisely on time for informal meetings. Not because she was careless about time, but because she gave everything the minutes it actually needed, rather than the minutes that had been scheduled. She sat down across from his desk with her olive notebook on her knee and looked at him with the particular quality of attention she had focused present, not waiting for him to perform. "I owe you an apology," Matteo said. The notebook didn't open. She watched him. "Last night," he said, "what I asked you, that was inappropriate. It was. I'm aware. I know you're aware." She held his gaze. "What I'm less clear on is why." He didn't answer immediately, which was in itself unusual. Matteo De Luca was not a man who left silences unfilled because he was uncertain what to say. He left silences unfilled strategically as a choice. But this silence was not strategic. "I don't know," he said. Livia looked at him for a long moment. "That's a first," she said. And even now, even in a conversation that he had initiated and controlled exactly 0% of since she had walked through the door, the corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but was in the direction of one. And something happened in Matteo's chest that he recognized finally, with a clarity that was deeply inconvenient. He was not going to address it today. "Thank you for the time," he said. "Of course." She stood. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said without turning, "Daniel Carter works for a company that has overlapping interests with 3 of your competitors' holding structures. You might want to know that." He stared at her back. "How long have you known that?" he asked. "Since about 10:30 this morning." She glanced over her shoulder. The expression on her face was layered in a way he couldn't immediately unpack. "I thought it might matter to you, professionally." Then she walked out. He sat very still for approximately 45 seconds. Then he called Marco. "Pull everything on Carter's business relationships," he said. "Corporate side. Competitor holdings investment overlaps any third-party structures." A pause. "This one's actually about business." The next week passed with a surface tension that Matteo recognized as something new. Nothing changed in their professional interactions. The calls were covered. The contracts were reviewed. The board materials were organized with the same precision they always were. Livia ran his schedule with the same competence she had always brought to it, anticipated the same needs, handled the same difficult calls, and redirected the same people who thought they could go through her to get to him more easily than they could get to him directly. Nothing changed, and everything was different. He noticed things he had either not noticed before or had noticed and immediately filed somewhere inaccessible. He noticed that when she was working on something complex, she bit the end of her pen, the olive green notebook pens, specifically Never Other pens, and when she caught herself doing it, she immediately stopped with a slight expression of annoyance at herself. He noticed that she took her lunch break in exactly 17 minutes on busy days and 45 minutes on slow ones, and that on the 45-minute days, she came back looking slightly more settled, as if the extra time had been spent on something that fed something in her. He noticed that she had a specific tone of voice she used when she was placating someone she privately thought was wrong, and a different specific tone for when she was placating someone she privately thought was being foolish, and a third tone for when she thought someone was wasting her time, and that not one person in the office besides him had ever identified the differences between them. He noticed that she had never in 5 years asked him for a personal favor. Not once. Not a ticket to something, not an introduction, not a reference for a friend. She had the access to ask for almost anything, and she never did. She treated his proximity to power the way she treated his temper, and his reputation, and his more complicated characteristics as facts about the environment that didn't particularly change the way she moved through it. He turned this over. He turned it over for a week. And then something happened that made turning it over a luxury he could no longer afford. It was a Thursday evening, 8:40, and the floor was empty except for him and Livia, which was not unusual. They were working through contracts for a real estate acquisition that had developed complications, a third-party easement issue that his legal team had flagged at the last minute, and that needed resolution before the Friday close. Livia was at the small table to the left of his desk with documents spread across it, making notes in her olive notebook, and he was at his desk with the original agreements, and they were working in the kind of comfortable shared silence that he had never had with anyone else, the kind that didn't require filling, that was simply two people in the same space doing the same work. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. The number was one he recognized, not saved, not ever to be saved, but one he knew, because he had made it a point to know every number in his world that could signal a problem. He picked up. "DeLuca," he said. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Cormac Riley, who occupied a specific and unpleasant position in the layered geography of Chicago's more invisible power structures. Not a rival, not an ally, but a kind of floating variable who had been useful at different moments and dangerous at others. "I heard your secretary's been making friends," Cormac said. Matteo's body went very still. He was aware without looking of Livia 10 feet away, making a note in her notebook. "Wrong number," Matteo said. "I don't think it is." A pause. "Carter's been asking questions, Matteo, about your company, specific ones, the kind that make me wonder if someone got to him first or if he got there on his own. And you're calling me about this because in this city, information about what you care about is worth something, and because I'm not interested in whatever someone else is planning to do with it." Another pause. "Keep an eye on your people, DeLuca." The line went dead. Matteo put the phone down. He did not look at Livia immediately. He looked at the window, at his own reflection in the dark glass, at the man he'd been looking at his whole life and had mostly come to terms with. Cormac Riley didn't know anything specific. He was a switchboard. He transmitted signals without always understanding their content. But what he had transmitted was enough. Carter wasn't just a man at a party. Carter was someone who had spent an evening talking to Livia Romano with a particular agenda, and whoever had put Carter there had done so knowing exactly what they were doing, which meant that somewhere in Matteo's world, someone had decided that Livia was a door. He stood up. "Livia." His voice was even. "I need to tell you something." She looked up from her notes. Something in his face made her close the notebook immediately. "What happened?" "That call," he said. "It was about you." She didn't move. "About me." "There's a possibility," he said carefully, "that Carter, the man from the party, was not at that event by coincidence." The room was very quiet. Livia set her pen down. "How specific a possibility?" "Specific enough that I'm not going to pretend it's speculation." She looked at him steadily. "Someone put him there. Someone who knew you would be there. Someone who knows your role in this company." He paused. "Someone who thought a conversation with you was worth engineering." He watched her absorb this. He watched her move through the stages of it, the initial shock which lasted approximately 2 seconds before her expression steadied into something more analytical. "What are they trying to find out?" she asked. "That depends on who they are." He moved around the desk and stood at the edge of the table where she had been working. "Which is what we're going to determine." "We," she said. "You have information they apparently think is useful. I need to know what that conversation actually covered, every detail, not the summary you gave me at the party." She studied him for a moment. "You thought it was jealousy," she said. "When you came over, you thought you were jealous." He didn't answer. "And now you're wondering if it was instinct instead," she said. He still didn't answer. Something shifted in her expression, something complicated that he caught only the edge of before she smoothed it. "Sit down," she said. "I'll tell you everything I remember." She opened her notebook to a clean page, and in the quiet of the empty 41st floor, with the city below them and something unnamed suspended in the air between them, Matteo De Luca sat down across from his secretary and began to understand that the night at the party had not been a beginning. It had been the moment he finally admitted to himself that something had already been there for a very long time. He watched her write down Carter's name in careful block letters at the top of a clean page, watched her underline it twice the way she underlined things that were going to require careful attention, and, he thought, she is not afraid. She's sitting here having just learned that someone may have engineered a conversation with her to get to me, and she is not afraid. She is organized. She was building a list before he'd finished the sentence. She was already 3 steps ahead of where he was. And something in Matteo De Luca's chest, which had been doing something complicated for 11 days, finally stopped pretending it wasn't doing it at all. "Carter mentioned Evanston," she said, pen moving. "He mentioned a development firm, Bridgeview Capital Partners." He dropped the name very casually, as if it had come up naturally. She looked up. "It didn't come up naturally. I remember thinking it felt placed." "You didn't mention that." "I mentioned it later." "You said it was about business." "I said you might want to know about the competitor overlap." She held his gaze. "I didn't say it felt engineered, because at the time I wasn't sure. Now I am." She went back to her notes. "He also asked me how long I'd been with the company, how much I knew about the import side. He phrased it as casual interest. He was good at it." "What did you tell him?" She looked up again. "Nothing," she said. "I told him exactly what I tell everyone who asks about the company, what's public record, and not a word more." He looked at her. "Matteo," she said quietly, "I've been your secretary for 5 years." She said it simply. Not as an argument, not as a defense, simply as a fact. "I've been your secretary for 5 years. Do you know what that means? Do you know how many things I know? Do you know how many times I could have been a door and wasn't?" He knew. He had known for 5 years. He had just never said it out loud. "I know," he said. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she went back to her notes, and neither of them said anything else about it. But in the quiet, in the particular quality of the silence they shared, Something had settled between them that had been waiting a long time to land. End of part 1. Part 2. Lưu ý viết 5.000 đến 5.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần Hải đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lời AI, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tăng độ kịch tính, không viết lần màn kết thúc phần, không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mức document mới, 2 đến 3 phút, cần có mini climax và đạt 10 đến 15. Mini climax mỗi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút, có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen, mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn, tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh cho tôi. Show more. Part 2. The Mafia Boss Who Never Admitted His Feelings. They worked until midnight. Livia filled 4 pages in her olive notebook with everything she remembered about the conversation with Daniel Carter. Not just the words, but the sequence, the rhythm, the specific moments when a question had arrived too smoothly, when a topic had shifted too naturally, when she had felt something slightly off, without being able to name it in the moment. Mateo read every line she wrote. He didn't interrupt. He didn't redirect. He simply read, and she watched him read, and she noticed something she had noticed before, but never examined too closely, the way he became completely still when he was processing something important. Not frozen. Still. The way a person goes still when every available unit of their attention has been redirected inward. He asked about the Tuesday schedule, Mateo said. Yes. Not the company schedule, my schedule specifically. He phrased it as curiosity, said he'd heard DeLuca International had an interesting approach to executive availability, something he'd read. She paused. There was no article. I checked this morning. Mateo looked up from the notebook. This morning, he repeated. Before the Hessler call, I had 40 minutes. She met his eyes. I told you something felt placed. He set the notebook down. He stood up and moved to the window. The same city, the same reflection he'd been looking at his whole life. And she watched his back and waited. Someone inside, he said. This doesn't work from the outside. The event details your presence there, the specific questions about Tuesday. That's internal. I know. He turned. And you're not frightened. It wasn't quite a question. It wasn't quite a statement. It landed somewhere in between, in the space where he seemed to be genuinely trying to understand her. I'm concerned, she said. Frightened is a different thing. Most people in your position would be frightened. Most people in my position haven't spent 5 years watching you handle problems that were significantly more complicated than this one. She held his gaze. I'm not going anywhere, Mateo, if that's what you're working up to asking. Something moved through his face that was very fast and very controlled, and that she almost missed. Go home, he said. We'll continue this tomorrow. She gathered her notebook and her coat and her bag, and she was at the office door when his voice came across the room, quieter than his working voice, different in a way she registered without immediately categorizing. Livia. She turned. Lock your door tonight. She looked at him for a moment. I always lock my door, she said. But she said it gently, and she left. He stood at the window for a long time after the elevator doors closed. He stood there long enough to watch the city go through the gradual thinning that happened after midnight. The traffic dissolving, the lights in the office buildings going dark, floor by floor. The particular quality of urban quiet that was never real quiet, but was its own kind of peace. He stood there and did not lie to himself. He was afraid. Not for the company, not for the operation, Not for the 15 years of carefully constructed architecture that held his world together. He was afraid for a woman in a burgundy dress who bit the end of her pen when she was thinking and had 4 pages of notes already assembled by the time he'd realized they were in danger. That was a different kind of afraid. He had not felt it before. He did not enjoy it. He picked up the phone and called Marco. Full internal audit, he said. Everyone who had access to the corporate event guest list, the executive scheduling system, and the floor access logs for the past 60 days. That's a wide net. Pull it anyway. Tonight. Start tonight. He ended the call. He did not go home for another 2 hours. When he finally left, he had the building's security coordinator personally confirm the overnight protocols on the executive floor, reviewed the external camera feeds himself, and made 3 calls that he would not have made if this were only about business. He did all of this without telling himself what it meant. He was very practiced at that. 2. The next morning came in hard. Livia arrived at 7:30 later than usual, which told him she had either not slept or had slept badly. Though when she sat down at her desk, she looked completely composed in the way of someone who had processed whatever they needed to process and arrived ready to work. He didn't comment. She didn't explain. By 8 o'clock, she had reorganized his morning around the new priority. The internal audit, the Carter situation, 2 calls that needed to happen before noon, and by 8:15, she had identified something that Marco's team hadn't found yet. She put a single sheet of paper on his desk. Guest list, she said. The final version that went to the venue, cross-referenced with the internal distribution log, who received it when and from which device. She pointed to a line near the bottom. This copy was forwarded externally at 11:47 on the Monday before the event. The send address is a personal email account registered to a device that accessed our network from the executive floor. Matteo looked at the page. Then he looked at her. How did you get this? I'm the executive secretary, she said. I have access to the distribution logs. I've had access to them for 5 years. A pause. I just never had a reason to look at them this carefully before. Livia? The account belongs to someone on this floor. That much is traceable. The rest of it. She gestured slightly, conceding the limit. The rest of it is your side of the problem. He picked up the phone and called Marco. I'm sending you something, he said. Drop everything else. He looked at Livia. Sit down, he said. I need to tell you something. She sat. What I'm about to tell you stays in this office, he said. Not because I don't trust you, because knowing it puts you at a specific kind of risk, and I need you to understand that before I say it. She was very still. There are 3 people on this floor, he said, who have known for 6 months that I've been working toward a consolidation, a significant one. It would restructure the balance of things in this city in a way that not everyone would welcome. He paused. If someone inside this organization is feeding information to a competitor, if they've identified you as a way to access my schedule, my patterns, my vulnerabilities, it's because they believe the consolidation can be disrupted, and they believe you're the fastest way to get to me. She absorbed this without moving. The fastest way to get to you, she repeated slowly. Yes. Because of my access. A pause. Something shifted in his face, a movement he controlled quickly but not quickly enough. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, and then in a voice that was very quiet and very precise. Is that the only reason? The office was very still. Matteo De Luca, who had sat across from men who wanted him dead and not blinked, looked at his secretary for 3 full seconds and did not immediately answer. That's a question for a different conversation, he said. It was not a denial. They both heard that. Livia looked down at her hands for a moment. Then she looked back up. What do you need me to do? He told her. And what he needed her to do was continue as normal. This was in some ways the hardest instruction he had ever given anyone, because continuing as normal required Livia to sit at her desk in full view of whoever on this floor had decided to use her and answer her phone and schedule his meetings and interact with colleagues. She now had to look at differently, all while showing nothing. She did it. She did it so well that by noon, Marco reported that the person they were looking for had accessed the scheduling system twice that morning. Normal access, nothing flagrant, the kind of access that would be invisible if you weren't looking for it. They were looking for it. By 2 in the afternoon, Marco had narrowed the field from 11 people to 4. By 3:30, when Livia came in to review the afternoon calendar, Matteo already knew which 4. "Tell me something," he said when she had finished the calendar review and was standing to leave. She stopped. "Last week?" he said. "When I asked you at the party, you said it was inappropriate." "It was. But you weren't angry." She considered this with the particular seriousness she brought to things that deserved it. "No," she said. "I wasn't angry." "Why not?" She looked at him for a moment. "Because I've known you for 5 years," she said. "And I've watched you be cold, and I've watched you be calculated, and I've watched you be every difficult thing you are. But I've never watched you be petty." She paused. "Whatever that question was at the party, it wasn't petty, so I wasn't angry." He said nothing. "But it also wasn't appropriate," she said. "And it can't happen again, whatever it was." She walked out. He sat with the thing she had not said for the rest of the afternoon. Whatever it was. She knew exactly what it was. She was giving him the courtesy of not saying it out loud before he was ready. He had never had someone do that for him before, hold space for him to arrive at something in his own time. The people in his life either pushed or withdrew. They never simply waited. He didn't know what to do with it. So he did what he did when he didn't know what to do with something. He set it aside and focused on the problem in front of him. The problem in front of him had a name by 4:45. The name was Vincent Caruso, 41 years old, 13 years with the company, Director of Strategic Development, which was a real title covering a real function that also provided, as it turned out, an unusually comprehensive view of Matteo's business calendar, his key relationships, and the internal movement of information across the executive floor. Vincent Caruso had, according to the access logs Marco compiled over the course of the afternoon, forwarded 3 documents to a personal account over the past 8 weeks. The guest list was 1. A quarterly meeting summary was another. The third was a floor directory that included direct extension numbers, personal assistant contacts, and physical office locations. The third document included Livia's personal work extension and desk location. When Marco showed him this, Matteo felt something that was not the cold, clean anger of a business problem. It was something hotter and more fundamental than that. "Where is he?" Matteo said. "He left at 4, Marco said. "Standard exit. He doesn't know we're looking." "Keep it that way." Matteo thought for a moment. "Don't move on him yet. I want to know who he's working for." "Carter. Carter's a messenger. I want the person who sent him." He stood. "Set up a meeting with Caruso for Monday morning. Routine review. Give him no reason to think anything has changed. And in the meantime, nothing moves without my direct authorization. Nothing." He paused. "And nobody gets near Livia's schedule without going through me first." Marco looked at him for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "Understood," he said. He left. Matteo stood alone in his office and thought about a man he had trusted for 13 years who had apparently decided that Livia Romano was useful currency. Something in his chest that had been uncertain all week became very certain very quickly. He walked out to the main floor. Livia was still at her desk, which was not a surprise. She stayed late on Fridays, when the week's work required it, and this week had required it significantly. She was reviewing something on her screen pen in hand, and she looked up when he appeared at her desk. "Vincent Caruso," he said. She looked at him. "He has access to your work information," Matteo said. "Your extension, your schedule, your physical location in this building. He's the one who gave your information to whoever put Carter at that party." He watched the information land. He watched her face move through it, the recognition, the recalibration, the quick flash of something that might have been anger before it settled into something colder and more useful. "Vincent," she said. "Yes. He organized the welcome event when I joined," she said. It wasn't a non sequitur. She was filing it, placing it against the map of everything she knew. "I know. He's always been," she stopped. "He's always been slightly too interested in what I know about your schedule. I wrote it off as workplace curiosity. Did it ever feel like something else?" she thought. "Once. About 2 months ago. He asked me something about your Tuesday pattern, how consistent it was. I told him your schedule was variable and changed the subject." She looked up. "I forgot about it immediately. Don't forget about anything from here on." She nodded once. "What are you going to do?" "Find out who he's working for, then handle it. Matteo." She waited until he was looking directly at her. "When you handle it." She paused. "Be careful. If they're willing to go this far to get information about your schedule, they're not doing it casually." He looked at her. "Are you worried about me?" he said. It came out differently than he intended. Not cool, not neutral, but carrying the particular frequency of a person who was genuinely asking. She held his gaze. "I'm always worried about you," she said. "I've just never said it before." The words settled in the space between them. She went back to her screen. He stood at her desk for 1 moment longer than he needed to. Then he walked back into his office and closed the door and stood in the dark of the room. He hadn't turned the lights on and breathed slowly and thought about a woman who had just told him she was always worried about him in the same tone she used to tell him his 9 o'clock had arrived. As if it were simply true. As if it had always simply been true. As if she had decided that this moment, of all the moments they'd moved through in 5 years, was the one where something that had always been true deserved to be spoken. He stood in the dark for a long time. The weekend passed with a particular kind of tension. Matteo spent Saturday in a series of calls. He did not log conversations with people who operated in the specific geography of Chicago, where information moved without records and favors were the currency. By Saturday afternoon, he had a clearer picture of who Vincent Caruso was talking to, and the picture was not surprising so much as it was clarifying. The competing interest was a man named Salvatore Bruni. Bruni ran a consortium of holding companies that had been trying to position themselves in the same spaces Matteo's consolidation would occupy. He was not in the traditional sense an enemy. He was a competitor who had made the calculation that removing Matteo's advantage was worth the investment of placing someone inside his organization. It was a reasonable business calculation. Matteo would have made the same one. He was not, however, particularly moved by the reasonableness of it. On Sunday morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He called Livia. Not her work line. Her personal number, which he had, because he had every essential contact number memorized, and Livia's fell into the category of essential, in the same way that his attorney's number and Marco's number fell into that category. It was simply a fact of his professional life that had never required examination. She picked up on the second ring. Matteo. Not surprised, not alarmed, just present. "I know who Caruso is working for," he said. A pause. "Who?" "Salvatore Bruni. Holding company network East Side operations positioned to compete with the consolidation I've been building." He paused. "He's been patient. This has been in motion for at least 4 months." 4 months? He could hear her moving a chair maybe, or the sound of her at a table rather than a desk. "When did you start the consolidation process?" 7 months ago. So he found out about it 3 months in." Another pause. "How?" "That's the question I haven't answered yet." She was quiet for a moment. "There's another leak," she said. "Possibly." "Not possibly. If Bruni knew about the consolidation 3 months in, Carter wasn't his first move. Carter was his, third, fourth. He could hear her thinking the particular rhythm of it that he'd come to know. He's been building a picture. The consolidation details were one piece. My information was another. He's assembling something." Matteo said nothing for a moment. "You're right," he said. "What does he need that he doesn't have yet?" "Timing," Matteo said. "Specifically the timing of the final step. If he can disrupt it at the right moment." "He doesn't need to destroy the consolidation," she said. "He just needs to delay it long enough for his own positioning to close." He was looking at the window of his apartment, the lake again, Sunday gray, and he was thinking that she had just laid out in 40 seconds what his strategic advisor had taken 3 hours to partially articulate on Saturday. "Yes," he said, "and the timing information lives where?" "My Tuesday schedule," he said. "The key meetings, the sequence, which Caruso asked me about 2 months ago." The silence stretched. "Matteo," she said, and her voice was quieter now, different in register. The professional surface of it gone, replaced by something that was simply her. "I want you to tell me the full shape of this. Not just what you think I need to know. All of it. Because if I'm a piece of what he's building, I need to understand the whole structure to know what I'm actually protecting." He thought about the conversation he'd had with her in his office. "I need you to understand that, before I say it, and how she had sat there steadily and waited." "I know," he said. "So tell me." He told her. He told her more than he'd told Marco, more than he'd told his attorney, more than he'd told the 3 people in his broader circle who had adjacent knowledge of the consolidation. He told her the shape of it, the whole architecture, the why and the how and the what it would mean when it was complete. He told her because she had asked. He told her because she was right. He told her because somewhere in the past 11 days, the category system he had maintained for 38 years had quietly and irrevocably changed, and Livia Romano no longer lived only in the professional column. She listened without interrupting until he was finished. Then she said, "The Tuesday pattern. Your standing call with the attorneys, that's fixed, right? That hasn't changed in 3 years." "Correct. Move it," she said. "Move it to Thursday. Change the external-facing calendar today before Monday. If Caruso looks, and he will look, let him see Thursday. Give Bruni bad timing information." Matteo was quiet for a moment. "You want to use the leak as a channel," he said. "You already know that's the right move." He did know that. He had been working toward it. But she had arrived there faster from a colder start, working only from what he'd just told her. "Update the calendar," he said. "I'll send the attorneys a private notice. I'll handle the calendar update. It needs to come from me. It's my access that's been compromised. If it comes from someone else, Caruso will notice the shift." A pause. "This way he finds the new information himself, thinks he's still ahead." "Livia." "Yes." He wanted to say something. He was aware of wanting to say something that belonged to a conversation they hadn't had yet, and that he wasn't certain he was ready to have. "Be careful tomorrow," he said instead, "when you see him." "I'm always careful," she said. He heard the small, precise sound of her standing up. "Matteo," she said, and something in the way she said his name stopped him from ending the call. "What you said on Friday, in the office." A pause. "That it was a question for a different conversation." He waited. "When you're ready for that conversation," she said quietly, "I'll be here." She ended the call. He stood at his window in the particular kind of silence that follows something important, and he let himself feel what he'd been refusing to name. For 11 days, the thing that had broken open in a party room when he'd watched her laugh. The thing that had sent him ordering background checks and canceling background checks, and standing in his dark office and calling her on a Sunday morning. He was in love with her. He had been in love with her for longer than 11 days. He had simply been very, very good at not knowing it. Gag. Monday came with the controlled intensity of a situation in motion. Livia updated the calendar at 8:17 in the morning. By 8:43, Marco's surveillance showed Caruso had accessed the scheduling system. By 9:15, Caruso had accessed it twice more. He was reading the new Tuesday entry. He was seeing the Thursday shift. He was doing exactly what they had expected him to do, with exactly the transparency of a man who did not know he was being watched. Livia came in for the morning briefing at 9:30, as if it were any other Monday. She set his coffee on the desk. She opened her notebook. She ran through the calendar with the same flat competence she brought to everything. And at the end of the briefing, before she stood to leave, she said, "He looked 3 times." Matteo looked up. "Caruso," she said. "I watched the reflection in my monitor. He accessed his phone at 8:51, 8:58, and 9:12. Same orientation each time. He was checking something with a tight update cycle." She met Matteo's eyes. "He's reporting in real time." Matteo said nothing for a moment. "You were watching him," he said. "I've been watching everyone on this floor since Thursday night." She said it without emphasis, as if it were the obvious thing to have done. He looked at her. "You're extraordinary," he said. It came out before he'd decided to say it. She looked at him, and he saw it happen, saw the thing she usually managed with such precision fail her for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of something unguarded and real that she recovered from immediately, but not before he caught it. "I'm thorough," she said. "Same thing." She looked at him for one more second. Then she closed her notebook and walked out. And Matteo De Luca, who had run an empire for 20 years on the precise management of what he showed and what he hid, sat at his desk and felt something settle in his chest that he was not any more going to pretend wasn't there. He picked up the phone and called Marco. "We move on Caruso Wednesday," he said. "Controlled. Clean. No external exposure." A pause. "And I want a meeting with Bruni arranged for the following week. Private. Just the 2 of us." "You want to meet Bruni directly?" "I want to end this cleanly," Matteo said. "And I want it done before it has the chance to reach anyone else in this building." He looked out at the floor through the glass wall of his office. Livia was at her desk. She was reading something pen in hand, completely composed. She did not look like someone who had spent her Sunday reconstructing a corporate intelligence operation and her Monday watching a traitor through a monitor reflection. She looked like his secretary, but she was something else entirely. She had always been something else entirely. He just hadn't been ready to see it until a stranger made her laugh at a party, and something in his chest had broken open and refused to close again. He was ready now. Tuesday passed without incident by design. Wednesday arrived, and on Wednesday morning, when Vincent Caruso walked into the conference room for what he believed was a routine strategic review, he found Matteo De Luca sitting at the head of the table with Marco on his left, and a printed copy of every access log, every forwarded document, and every external communication Caruso had generated in the past 4 months, laid out in a neat stack in the center of the table. Caruso stopped in his doorway. Matteo looked at him. "Sit down, Vincent," he said. His voice was completely even. It was the most frightening sentence Caruso had ever heard. He sat down. And in the room next door at her desk, doing the work of the day, with the same steady competence she brought to everything, Livia Romano made a small notation in her olive notebook, underlined it twice, and moved on to the next item. She had known from the moment she'd updated the calendar on Monday morning that Wednesday would take care of itself. She trusted Matteo to handle what was his to handle, and she was already thinking about what came after. End of Part 2. Part 3. Lưu ý viết 5.000 đến 5.500 từ, liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 2 đặt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lời AI kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tăng độ kịch tính, không viết lân man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mức document mới. 2 đến 3 phút, cần có mini climax và đạt 10 đến 15. Mini climax mọi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút, Có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen, mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn. Tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh cho tôi. Show more. Part 3. When Power Meets Vulnerability. Vincent Caruso didn't cry. Mateo had expected many things in that conference room. Anger, denial, the particular desperation of a cornered man trying to negotiate his way out of a situation that had already closed around him. He had handled enough of these conversations to know the patterns. What he had not expected was the silence. Caruso sat across from him, looked at the stack of documents in the center of the table, and went completely quiet. Not the quiet of someone calculating. The quiet of someone who had already calculated, had already arrived at the only conclusion available, and had nothing left to perform. 13 years, Mateo said. Caruso looked at his hands. 13 years, and you let someone turn you into a door. Mateo's voice was even. It was always even. That was the thing people misunderstood. He didn't need to raise his voice. He had never needed to raise his voice. What did Bruni offer you? A pause. A position, Caruso said. When the consolidation failed, a directorship. A position, Mateo repeated. And money. Caruso looked up. His face was exhausted in the way of someone who had been carrying something heavy for months. My son's medical situation, it's been... He stopped. I know about your son, Mateo said. Caruso blinked. I've known for 8 months. I was arranging a solution through the company's private medical fund. I hadn't told you yet because the paperwork wasn't finalized. Mateo looked at him steadily. You went to Bruni before I had the chance. The silence that followed was the worst kind. The kind that arrives when someone realizes the thing they traded everything for was already being offered to them for free. Caruso looked at the table. Mateo. Don't. The word was quiet and final. Marco will walk you through the exit terms. Your son's medical coverage transfers to a private arrangement. I'm honoring that, regardless, because it was never about him. He stood. But you're done here, Vincent. He walked out. He did not look back. In the hallway, Marco fell into step beside him. Bruni, Marco said. Schedule the meeting. Friday if he's available. If not, Monday. Mateo paused at the elevator. And pull the medical fund documentation for Caruso's son. Make sure it's processed before he leaves today. Marco looked at him. He betrayed you, Marco said. Not a challenge. Just an observation from a man who had known him long enough to occasionally be honest. His son didn't, Mateo said. He got in the elevator. He rode up to the 41st floor and walked past Livia's desk without stopping, went into his office, and stood at the window for 3 minutes, in the particular silence of someone who had just done something that cost them. Then he sat down and went back to work. Livia came in at noon with a sandwich he hadn't asked for, and a coffee he absolutely had not asked for, set them on the corner of his desk, and said, Caruso's exit was clean. HR has the paperwork. He's gone by 2. Good. The medical fund transfer went through at 11:47. She said it without inflection. No commentary, no performance. Just the facts delivered in the tone of someone who understood that he hadn't done it for the applause. He looked at her. Did Marco tell you? Marco tells me everything that touches your calendar and your operations, Mateo. That's how I do my job. She met his eyes. You did the right thing. Don't make it complicated. I'm not making it anything. She picked up his empty coffee cup from this morning and replaced it with the new one. Eat. You haven't since breakfast. She walked out. He looked at the sandwich for a moment. Then he ate it. The Bruni meeting happened on Friday afternoon. Mateo went alone, which Marco argued against, and Mateo overruled without discussion. The location was neutral, a private dining room in a restaurant on Michigan Avenue. that both men had used for exactly this kind of conversation, at different points in their careers, a room that existed in the specific geography of the city where powerful men went to say things that never got written down. Salvatore Bruni was 63 years old, silver-haired, and had the kind of face that had learned over decades to show nothing it didn't intend to show. He was already seated when Matteo arrived, which was deliberate. Bruni always positioned himself early in these things, a small power move so habitual it had probably stopped being conscious. Matteo sat down without acknowledging it. "Caruso's gone," Bruni said. "Yesterday. Clean. Clean enough." Matteo poured water from the carafe on the table. "You ran a patient operation. 4 months is patient." Bruni smiled slightly. "You run patient operations yourself." "I do." Matteo looked at him. "What were you actually trying to accomplish?" "You know what I was trying to accomplish." "I know the business logic. I want to know how far you were willing to take it." Bruni was quiet for a moment. He picked up his water glass, turned it slightly, set it down. "The woman," he said. "Your secretary." Matteo's expression didn't change, not by a fraction. "What about her?" he said. "Carter reported that she's smart, contained, didn't give him anything useful." Bruni looked at him steadily. "He also said she was the reason you came across the room." Silence. "I came across the room because Carter's affiliated with 3 of your holding companies," Matteo said. "My security team flagged it." Bruni smiled again. This time it reached his eyes slightly. "Of course." "Stay away from her," Matteo said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was the quietest thing he'd said in the entire conversation, and it landed in the room with the weight of something absolute. Bruni looked at him for a long moment. "She's important to you," he said. "She's my employee, which means she's under my protection. That's a simple principle that applies to every person in my organization." A pause. "But I want to be specific with you, Salvatore. If anyone in your network makes another approach to her direct, indirect, social, professional, any approach, this conversation will be the last civil exchange we have. Are we clear?" Bruni studied him. "We're clear," he said. "Good." Matteo folded his hands on the table. "Now let's talk about the consolidation." Bruni's expression shifted, surprise quickly managed. "You want to talk about it?" "I want to offer you a position in it." Matteo looked at him evenly. "Junior position. Specific to the East Side holdings where your network has genuine infrastructure. You bring your operational knowledge, I bring the consolidation framework, and we stop spending resources trying to undermine each other." The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds. "You're serious," Bruni said. "I don't come to private meetings to perform." Bruni looked at him. "Why?" "Because what Caruso was doing was expensive for both of us, and what you were trying to do would have been more expensive. I'd rather spend those resources building something than burning them on a conflict that neither of us needs." He paused. "And because I'm not interested in enemies, I can turn into something more useful." Bruni was quiet for a long moment. "I'll need to think," he said. "You have until Monday." Matteo stood. "Call Marco with your answer." He left the restaurant and stood outside for a moment in the cold November air, and for the first time in 2 weeks, he felt the specific kind of clarity that came when a complicated problem had been reduced to its essential shape. The Caruso situation was closed. The Bruni situation was in resolution. The consolidation was back on its correct timeline. Everything was handled. Everything except the thing that lived in the space between him and Livia Romano and had no operational resolution available to it. He got in the car. He pulled out his phone. He typed, "The Bruni meeting is done." It went well. He stared at what he'd typed for a moment. He hadn't told Marco where he was going after the restaurant. He hadn't told his attorney. He hadn't told anyone. He had typed a message to Livia. He sent it. Her response came in 40 seconds. "Good. Go home, Matteo. It's Friday." He looked at the message for a long moment. Then, for the first time in possibly years, Matteo De Luca did exactly what someone told him to do without argument or modification. He went home. The following Monday arrived with the particular quality of a week that had been reset. Bruni called Marco at 9:15 and accepted the terms. The consolidation moved forward. The East Side Holdings began the integration process. The thing that had been a threat 2 weeks ago was now with the particular alchemy of Matteo's preferred method of conflict resolution an asset. The floor felt different. Caruso's absence had left a specific gap in the energy of the executive level. Not a mourned gap, but the kind of gap that makes people recalibrate, look at their own positions, reassess the landscape with fresh attention. Matteo noticed the shift in how people moved through the common areas, the slightly elevated quality of attention in the morning briefings, the particular alertness of people who had been reminded that this was not a casual environment. He didn't address it directly. He didn't need to. What he did on Monday afternoon was walk out to Livia's desk at 3 o'clock and say, "Come in when you have a minute." She came in 2 minutes later. Notebook pen, the particular readiness she carried everywhere. He was standing at his desk rather than sitting, which she noticed everything he had fully accepted this about her, and she stopped in the middle of the room rather than going to her usual chair. "This isn't about the calendar," she said. "No." She waited. He had thought about how to have this conversation. He had thought about it on Friday night and through the weekend, and for the first 45 minutes of Monday morning. He had considered and discarded approximately 9 different approaches, which was unusual. He was not generally speaking a man who needed 9 attempts to find the right words. "I owe you something," he said. She tilted her head very slightly. "What do you owe me?" An honest conversation. He looked at her steadily. "The one I've been moving around the edges of for the past 2 weeks. The room was quiet. "All right," she said. "At the party," he said. "When I saw you with Carter. What I felt." He stopped. Started again. It wasn't professional instinct. It wasn't security concern. It became those things, and those things were real, but that's not what it was when I crossed the room. He held her gaze. "You know what it was." "I know what it looked like," she said carefully. "It looked like what it was." She was very still. "Matteo, I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that before you say anything else. I'm not positioning this as a request. I'm telling you something that's true, and I'm telling you because you told me you'd be here when I was ready, and I'm ready." She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her face move through something complicated, not the smoothing out she usually performed so efficiently, but an actual working through visible and unguarded. "How long?" she said. He considered lying. Not to deceive her, he had never lied to Livia in 5 years, and was not going to start now, but to soften something that was in its full shape, fairly exposing. "I don't know exactly," he said. "I know it wasn't new when I crossed the room at that party. I know I'd been not knowing it for a long time." She absorbed this. "Not knowing it," she repeated. "Actively not knowing it," he said. "There's a difference." Something shifted in her face that was almost a smile, and then wasn't. "Why are you telling me now?" she said. "Everything with Caruso is resolved. Bruni is in. The consolidation is back on track. You could have..." She paused. "You could have let it go back to what it was." "Yes?" he said. "Why didn't you?" He looked at her. "Because you told me on Sunday that you're always worried about me," he said, "and I realized I'd been hearing things from you for 5 years, that I'd been filing as professional, and they weren't only professional, and it wasn't fair to either of us to keep pretending they were." The silence was very long. "I'm your secretary," she said, not as a deflection, as a fact being examined. "I know. That's not a small thing to work around." "I know that too." She looked at him. "What are you actually asking me, Matteo?" "I'm asking if there's something to talk about," he said. "Beyond the calendar, beyond the operations, beyond what we've been..." He searched for the word. "Beyond what we've been pretending is sufficient." She looked at him for a long time, and then she sat down in her usual chair, which was not the response he had expected, and she set her notebook on her knee and looked at him with an expression he had seen before, the one she wore when she was about to say something that would be direct and possibly uncomfortable, and that she was going to say anyway because she didn't have a mode for anything else. "I need to say something to you," she said, "and I need you to hear it without reacting before I'm finished." He sat down across from her. "When you came across the room at that party," she said, "my first response was not what it should have been." He waited. "My first response was—" She paused, choosing carefully. "It was something I'd been managing for a long time, something I'd gotten very good at not looking at directly, because looking at it directly wasn't an option that made sense in my life." She held his gaze. "You are a specific kind of man, Matteo. You run a specific kind of world, and I've been close enough to that world for 5 years to understand exactly what it costs the people inside it." "Livia." "I'm not finished." He closed his mouth. "I stayed," she said. "For 5 years I had the access to know things that would have made most people leave, and I stayed. I've thought about why in the quiet parts of the past 2 weeks, and the honest answer is that what I've seen isn't only darkness." She paused. "I've seen you honor a man's son even after he betrayed you. I've seen you choose a difficult peace over an easier war. I've watched you carry things that would break most people and not put the weight on anyone around you." She was very still. "I've seen the man behind the reputation, and I didn't fall in love with the reputation." The room was very, very quiet. Matteo looked at her. "Say that again," he said. His voice was different, stripped of the professional finish he maintained on everything. She held his gaze. "I didn't fall in love with the reputation." He didn't move. He sat completely still and felt something happen in his chest that was bigger than anything. He had a vocabulary for something that had been compressed for so long that the sudden expansion of it was almost physical. "But," she said, and the word landed carefully. He waited. "I won't be a secret," she said. "I won't be a protected asset. I won't be the woman you keep separate from your world because you think the world is too dangerous for her." She leaned forward slightly. "I've already been in your world for 5 years, Matteo. I've already been a target. I've already rebuilt an intelligence operation from a guest list and a reflection in a monitor. I'm not fragile and I'm not peripheral, and I won't be treated as either." He looked at her. "I know that," he said. "Do you, Livia?" He said her name the way he'd said it at the party, not as an address, but as something more essential. "I didn't cross the room at that party because I wanted to protect something fragile. I crossed the room because I couldn't stand watching someone else make you light up." The words landed. She looked at him, and for the first time in the conversation, for the first time in 5 years, possibly, something in her face didn't move toward composure. It stayed open, present. "That's very honest," she said quietly. "I'm capable of it." "I know you are." A pause. "It's one of the things." He looked at her. "One of the things." "One of the reasons," she said simply. They looked at each other across the desk that had been between them for 5 years. "So what do we do?" he said. "I don't know yet." She said it without apology. "I know what I feel. I know what you've just told me. But knowing those things and knowing what comes next are 2 different conversations. I'm not in a hurry." She looked at him with an expression that was layered and warm and more unguarded than he had ever seen on her face in 5 years of watching her face. "That's possibly the most surprising thing you've ever said to me," she said. He felt something shift in his chest that was, if he was not mistaken, something close to joy. He couldn't fully remember the last time he had felt something close to joy. "Don't tell anyone," he said. She smiled, a real smile, the same quality as the one at the party, the one that had broken something open in him 3 weeks ago, except this one was directed at him. This one was for him. "Your secret is safe," she said. She stood. She picked up her notebook. She was almost at the door when she stopped. "Matteo." He looked up. "Whatever this is," she said, "whatever it becomes, I need you to understand something." She held his gaze with the complete directness that had always been her most distinctive quality. "I don't want to be protected because you own me. I want to be standing beside you because you respect me." He held her gaze. "I know the difference," she said. "I do too," he said. "Now." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she walked out. He sat alone in his office and understood with the particular clarity of a man who has spent his life knowing exactly what he has and what he doesn't, that he was looking at the most important thing that had ever happened to him, and that he had nearly spent his entire life not knowing it. The next 3 weeks moved with a different quality. Nothing changed visibly. Nothing changed professionally. Livia ran his schedule with the same precision, handled the consolidation documentation with the same thoroughness, managed his world with the same competent invisibility that had always made her irreplaceable. But things were different in the specific ways that mattered. He ate lunch most days now, a small shift unremarkable to anyone who didn't know that before it had been irregular at best. She didn't bring his lunch to him. She simply said, at 12:30, "I'm going downstairs," with the particular neutrality of someone who was not asking but was leaving a door open. He went down most days. They ate in the building cafe in 15 or 20 minutes with a quality of ease that was not new. They had always been able to share silence comfortably, but was now acknowledged instead of carefully not noticed. He started telling her things he'd previously kept inside his professional role. Not operational things, those she'd always known. Personal things. The difficulty of the Monday call with Nico, who had stopped speaking to him entirely over a family property dispute that had now stretched 3 years and showed no sign of resolution. The particular exhaustion of running a world where trust had to be earned so carefully and could be lost so fast. She listened without performing empathy. She responded directly, which was what he needed. She didn't treat his difficulties as catastrophes or as things to be managed. She treated them as problems the same way she treated every problem, as things that had shapes, and shapes that could be understood, and understanding that could eventually lead to something better. It was the most intimate thing anyone had ever done for him. She told him things too. Not dramatically, she was not a dramatic woman, which was one of the things he loved most about her. She mentioned in passing that her relationship with her sister was strained over an inheritance situation from their father's estate, that she'd been considering going back to school for something she'd been putting off for a decade, that the reason she'd taken this job 5 years ago, the real reason beyond the professional opportunity, was that she'd been in a previous position that had made her feel invisible, and she had wanted to work somewhere that wouldn't. "Did you," he said, "feel invisible here?" She looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "You're many things, Matteo, but you've never made me feel invisible." He held that. "Have I made you feel anything else I should know about?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Occasionally," she said, "you've made me feel like the only person in the room." A pause. "That's a complicated thing when the person making you feel it is someone you've been pretending you don't think about." He looked at her. "I made it complicated," he said. "We both did," she said. "It takes 2 people to build a very careful professional relationship over feelings that aren't entirely professional." He thought about 5 years. 5 years of her telling him when he was wrong and bringing him coffee he hadn't asked for and staying late without complaint and looking at him, always looking at him with an attention that he had received and absorbed and never not once questioned the nature of. "I wasted time," he said. "You weren't ready," she said, simply, without accusation. And honestly, a pause. "I don't know that I was either. I needed to know who you were before I could trust what I felt. And now," she met his eyes. "Now I know who you are," she said. The thing that changed everything happened on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the conversation in his office. It was not dramatic in the way that things in his world were usually dramatic. No late-night call, no emergency meeting, no crisis requiring immediate management. It was an ordinary Thursday morning 9:45, and Livia came into his office, not for a scheduled meeting, but in the unscheduled way she had when something required immediate attention. She closed the door. He looked up. Her face was composed. It was always composed, but he had learned to read the specific variations beneath the surface, and what he read now was not alarm, but something more complicated. She sat down. "I got a call this morning," she said. "From a number I didn't recognize. A woman. She said her name was Elena." A pause. "She said she was calling on behalf of Matteo De Luca's family." He went very still. "My family," he said. "She said that your brother Nico has been approached by a group that wants to use him as leverage against you, that he's being," she said, "entertained, which I took to mean that someone is cultivating a relationship with him and feeding him information designed to increase the existing conflict between you." Matteo set down his pen. "She said Nico doesn't know he's being used," Livia continued. "He thinks the relationship is genuine, but the information he's being given about you—" She paused. "She said it's been specifically curated to make him believe that you've been working against him, that the property dispute isn't a dispute, but a deliberate move on your part to take what's his." The silence in the room was absolute. "Who is Elena?" Matteo said. "She wouldn't say more than that she's someone who knows your family and doesn't want to see what's being planned succeed." Livia looked at him steadily. "I have the number she called from. It's registered to a business address in Naperville." She placed a piece of paper on his desk. He looked at it. "This is not Bruni," he said. "No," she agreed. "Bruni accepted your terms. This is something else." Someone who watched Bruni fail and decided to try a different angle. "Nico," she said quietly, "because the property dispute is already real, because the wound is already open, because they don't need to create the leverage, they just need to deepen it." He looked at her. "They're going to turn my brother against me," he said. "They're already doing it," she said. "The question is how far along they are." He stood up. He walked to the window. The lake was out there, always the lake, always the gray distance of it. And he stood with his back to her and thought about Nico. 23 years. The age Nico had been when Matteo had first understood what their world fully was, and had made the decision to shield his younger brother from the worst of it, which had required a series of decisions over the years that had looked from the outside like control, like power exerted in one direction, like a man protecting himself at his brother's expense. "He already believes it," Matteo said. "Some of it," Livia said carefully. "No." He turned. "Not some of it. He's believed the narrative for years, that I've been consolidating things at his expense, that the family structure was designed to benefit me." He paused. "He's been half right, and someone found the half where he's right and used it." She watched him. "What do you need?" she said. He looked at her, and here it was. Here was the thing he had been circling without fully naming. Not just the professional necessity of it, but the thing underneath. The thing she had named in his office 3 weeks ago, and that he had been moving toward ever since. He needed her. Not her operational intelligence, not her access to his systems, not her ability to decode a scheduling leak through a monitor reflection. He needed her. Her steadiness, the way she looked at problems and found their shapes, the way she could sit across from him in the middle of a crisis and make him feel like he was still a person rather than just a function. "I need to call Nico," he said. "Yes." "I haven't spoken to him in 3 weeks." "I know. He's not going to want to hear from me." "Probably not." A pause. "Call him anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. "Stay," he said, "while I call." She didn't ask why. She just set her notebook on her knee and looked at him with the particular quality of presence that she had always carried, and that he had always absorbed, and that he understood now was the most valuable thing anyone had ever given him. He picked up the phone. He called his brother. Nico picked up on the fourth ring, which was itself a small victory he had expected voicemail. "Matteo," Nico said. His voice was flat, not hostile. Flat in the way of someone who has decided that flatness is safer than feeling. "I need to tell you something," Matteo said, "and I need you to listen before you say anything." A pause. "Fine. Someone has been talking to you," Matteo said, "about the property situation, about me. Telling you things that feel true because some of them are." He kept his voice even, though it required more effort than he usually needed. "I need to know who it is." Silence on the line. "Why?" Nico said. "Because they're using you to get to me. And I don't want you to be used, Nico. Whatever's between us, whatever I've done or haven't done, I don't want my brother to be a door." Silence. A long silence. The kind that meant something was happening inside it. "There's a man," Nico said finally. "He reached out about 6 weeks ago, said he knew the family, said he had information about the Milan holdings." Matteo closed his eyes for 1 second. 6 weeks ago. Before Caruso. Before Carter. Before any of it. This had started before any of it. "His name?" Matteo said. Another pause. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm calling you," Matteo said. "If I wanted to manage this situation, I wouldn't call you Nico. I'd manage it without involving you at all. I'm calling you because you deserve to know you've been manipulated. And because—" He stopped. The word was harder than he expected. "Because I've protected you badly. I've been protecting you in ways that looked like something else, and I know that. And I'm sorry for it." The silence on the line was different this time. Nico said nothing for so long that Matteo thought he had lost him. Then, "His name is Ferretti. Gianluca Ferretti. He has an office in the 3rd District." Matteo wrote it down. Livia across from him was already writing. "Nico," Matteo said, "don't contact him again until you hear from me." A pause. "All right. Thank you." Another pause. Smaller. "You said you were sorry." "I am." "You've never said that before." Not accusatory. Just noting something. "I know," Matteo said. "I'm aware that's a problem." For just a moment, the smallest, most fragile moment, something that might have been the beginning of something, shifted in the silence between them. "Call me when it's handled," Nico said. The line went dead. Matteo set the phone down. Livia was looking at him. "Ferretti," she said. "I know the name," he said. "Peripherally. Old network Northern Italy primarily works through family conflict. It's his method. Find an existing fracture and widen it. How do you close it? You remove the source of the false information, and then you do the harder thing." He looked at her. "You fix the fracture." She held his gaze. "The property situation," she said. "That's real. It's real, and it's fixable," he said. "I just never fixed it because fixing it required a conversation He stopped. "A conversation I didn't know how to have." She was quiet for a moment. "You're having a lot of those lately," she said. He looked at her. "Something changed," he said. She smiled. Not the polite smile, not the meeting smile. The real one, the one he'd seen at the party, and that had broken something open in him, and that he had been finding reasons to deserve ever since. "Yes," she said. "Something did." He looked at her and felt something that he had spent 38 years not having a word for settle into a shape so clear he couldn't pretend anymore it was anything other than what it was. He was going to have to learn how to be a person who deserved this. He was willing to do that. He was, for the first time he could remember, genuinely willing to do something hard for a reason that had nothing to do with power or strategy or the careful management of outcomes. He was willing to do it because she was sitting across from him with her olive notebook and her real smile and her complete, unwavering steadiness. And he was not going to waste another 5 years not knowing what he knew. "Marco's going to need the Ferretti information," she said, settling back into work with the ease of someone who had always understood that the most important moments lived right alongside the ordinary ones. Yes, he said. I'll have it ready in an hour. Livia. She looked up. Thank you, he said. She held his gaze for one moment that carried everything they hadn't fully said yet, and everything they eventually would. Always, she said, and went back to her notes. End of part 3. Part 4. Lưu ý viết 5.000 đến 5.500 từ, liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ-Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi. Không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần bồn đắt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi AI, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tăng độ kịch tính, không viết lằn man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mực document mới, 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đặt 10 đến 15 mini climax. Mỗi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút. Có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn, tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show more. Part 4. The woman who made him human again. The Ferretti situation resolved faster than Matteo expected. Not because Gianluca Ferretti was easy to handle, he wasn't. He was 61 years old, had been operating in the gray spaces of European family business conflicts for 30 years, and had the particular slipperiness of a man who never left documentation and never made a move he couldn't publicly disavow. He was the kind of problem that took months to untangle cleanly. But Matteo didn't need months. He needed 48 hours because Livia had spent Friday afternoon and most of Saturday building a paper trail that Ferretti had believed was invisible. The financial transfers between Ferretti's 3rd District office and 2 shell structures that connected with 3 careful steps of corporate layering to a family in Genoa that had a 20-year grievance against the De Luca name. She found it through public filings, not through any access she shouldn't have had. Not through any method that required Matteo's less visible resources, through public corporate registry filings, tax documentation available to anyone who knew which databases to search, and the particular kind of patient, methodical attention that she had always brought to complex problems. She sent it to him Saturday evening with a message that said, "Third Shell Company. Look at the Genoa connection." He called her immediately. "How long did this take you?" he said. "Since yesterday afternoon." A pause. "I had time." "It's Saturday, Livia. I'm aware of what day it is." He heard the small sound of her setting something down, a cup maybe. "Do you want to talk about the Genoa connection, or do you want to talk about my weekend schedule?" "Genoa," he said. "The Calabrese family. They lost a significant contract to your father's company in 2003. The dispute was never formally resolved because your father died before the arbitration completed, and the estate chose settlement terms that the Calabrese side believed were unfair." She paused. "Ferretti has worked for them before." 2009, 2014, 2018. 3 separate family conflict operations in 3 different countries, all with the same structural signature. Find an internal fracture, insert false information, wait for the family to destroy itself. "He's not freelance," Matteo said. "He's on retainer." For the Calabrese specifically, yes. He absorbed this. A 23-year-old grievance. His father's unresolved business resurrected and weaponized through his own brother. "Matteo," she said quietly. "This was never about Bruni. Bruni was opportunistic. He saw the opening and tried to exploit it. But Ferretti was already in motion before Bruni, before Carter, before any of it. The Calabrese wanted me destabilized," he said. "They wanted your family destroyed from the inside. It's cleaner than a direct confrontation. Less risk, more damage." A pause. "And they almost had it. If you hadn't called Nico, if you hadn't found Elena's call credible, you would have found it eventually." Not before Nico did something irreversible. He was quiet for a moment. Who is Elena? A beat. I think Elena is someone in the Calabresi family who doesn't want this, Livia said. Someone inside who made a different choice. He thought about this. A woman in the Calabresi family calling a number she'd obtained through some internal intelligence warning the secretary of the man they were trying to destroy because she'd decided it was wrong. Because she'd decided that a 23-year-old grievance wasn't worth what was being done with it. Find out who she is, he said, carefully. I owe her something. I'll be careful. Livia, he paused. Thank you, for the Saturday. You can thank me by eating dinner, she said. Have you eaten? He looked at his desk. Empty except for the Ferretti documents he'd been reviewing. No, he said. Matteo. It's 8:30. There is food available at 8:30. This is not a complicated logistical problem. A pause and then something softer in her voice, something that had been arriving more often in recent weeks. Eat something. The Calabresi problem will still exist after you eat. He felt something in his chest move. Good night, Livia, he said. Good night, she said. He ordered food. He ate it. He sat in his apartment afterward and thought about the particular strangeness of being a man who had run a world alone for 20 years and who was now being told to eat dinner by a woman in a burgundy dress who bit the end of her pen and had cracked a 30-year-old shell company structure on a Saturday afternoon because she'd had time. He thought, I am not going to survive loving her. Then he thought, I'm not sure I want to survive anything else. Monday morning, he called the Calabresi family directly. Not Ferretti, not through intermediaries. Directly to the head of the family, a man named Aurelio Calabresi, 74 years old, Milan-based, who picked up his private line with the wariness of a man who had not expected this call. De Luca, Aurelio said. I know about Ferretti, Matteo said. I know about the Genoa retainer. I know about what you did with my brother. A pause. And I know about the 2003 settlement. Silence on the line. I'm not calling to threaten you, Matteo said. I'm calling because the dispute was real and the settlement was bad, and my father is dead, and I'm the one who's here now. He kept his voice even. Tell me what you actually need, Aurelio. Not what Ferretti's been trying to take from me. What you actually need. The silence stretched for almost 10 seconds. You're serious, Aurelio said. The same words Bruni had used, carrying the same disbelief. I don't make calls like this to perform, Matteo said. Another silence. The Genoa contract, Aurelio said finally. The terms were wrong. Your father knew they were wrong. His estate knew they were wrong. We lost 7 years of business positioning because of that settlement, and nobody ever... He stopped. Nobody ever said it was wrong. It was wrong, Matteo said. The silence that followed was very long and very different from the ones before it. I'll have my attorney contact yours, Matteo said. We'll find a fair resolution, not a settlement, an actual resolution. He ended the call. He sat for a moment, then he walked out to Livia's desk. She looked up. I called Aurelio Calabresi, he said. She went completely still. Directly, she said. Directly. She stared at him. Matteo, that was... She stopped. What did he say? He said the settlement was wrong. A pause. I told him he was right. She looked at him for a long moment. You're going to resolve it, she said. Yes. That's... She paused again, and he watched something move through her face that was unguarded and warm. That's going to take time, and it's going to cost you something. Probably. But you're doing it. Yes. She held his gaze. Because of Nico, she said. He considered the question honestly. Partly, he said. And partly because someone built a 20-year operation on a wound that didn't need to stay open. And I'd rather close the wound than keep defending against everyone who finds it. He paused. And partly because someone I trust told me that fixing the fracture is the harder thing, and that I should do the harder thing. She was quiet. I said that on Thursday, she said. I know when you said it. She looked at him with an expression he was still learning, had been learning for weeks, the specific vocabulary of her unguarded face, which was different from the composed face she wore through the workday, and that he was coming to understand was not a mask so much as a choice, a deliberate allocation of her interior life toward the people and moments that deserved it. She was choosing this moment. Go call your brother, she said. I'm going to. He needs to know about the Calabrese before he hears it from somewhere else. I know. And Matteo. She waited until he was fully looking at her. Tell him more than just the operational information. Tell him the part you told me on Saturday. He knew what part she meant. He had never told Nico that the decisions he'd made over 20 years, the ones that had looked like control, like power consolidating inward, like a man protecting himself at his brother's expense, had been in their imperfect and badly communicated way an attempt to protect Nico from the worst of what their world was. He had never said it because saying it required admitting that the protection had also been a cage. Yes, he said. He went back into his office. He called Nico. Nico picked up on the second ring this time. The conversation with Nico lasted an hour and 40 minutes. Matteo didn't summarize it for Livia when he came out. He didn't have the right words for it yet, and some things needed to settle before they could be explained. But she looked at his face when he appeared in the doorway, and whatever she read there made her close her laptop and give him the particular quality of attention that required nothing from him. Okay, she said. Getting there, he said. She nodded once, opened her laptop again, went back to work. And the simplicity of that, the complete absence of demand or management in it, the way she simply received what he gave her and asked for nothing more, hit him somewhere fundamental. He's coming to Chicago, Matteo said. She looked up. Next month. He wants to see the consolidation documentation. He wants to understand what I've been building. A pause. He said, he stopped, assembled the words. He said he should have asked years ago instead of assumed. Livia was quiet for a moment. That's big, she said. Yes. Are you okay with it? He thought about the question. It was not the kind of question people asked him. It was the kind of question that assumed he had an interior response worth consulting. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I want to be. She looked at him with the warmth that had been arriving more openly in recent weeks. Not performed, not managed, simply there. The way she was simply there. That's enough for now, she said. He held that. Yes, he said. I think it is. The following 2 weeks moved with a quality Matteo had no previous reference for. The consolidation closed on a Wednesday, quietly, cleanly, without the disruption that Bruni and Ferretti and the entire layered network of the past month had been designed to create. The East Side holdings integrated on schedule. The Bruni partnership formalized with terms that were better for both parties than either initial position had been. The Calabrese negotiation began with a first call between attorneys that lasted 3 hours and ended with a framework that both sides described independently as more than fair. Marco reported all of this with the particular satisfaction of a man who had spent a month handling crisis after crisis and was now watching the board reset to something stable. Clean close, Marco said. Yes, Matteo said. You handled Bruni, Caruso, Ferretti, and the Calabrese in 30 days. Marco looked at him. That's... Don't, Matteo said. Marco smiled, a rare expression on a man who managed it sparingly. I was going to say it's unprecedented. Don't say that either. Noted. Marco paused at the door. For what it's worth, and I'm saying this once, I don't think you handled any of it alone. He left before Matteo could respond. Matteo sat with that for a moment. Then he stood up, walked out to Livia's desk and said, Friday evening, are you free? She looked up. Her expression was careful in the specific way of someone managing a response that wanted to be less careful. That depends, she said, on what Friday evening involves. Dinner, he said. Not a work dinner, not a meeting. Dinner. She held his gaze. Where? She said. Somewhere small, he said. I don't want to be recognized. Something in her face softened. You want to go somewhere normal. I want to eat at a table across from you without a desk between us, he said. Yes. She looked at him for one more moment. Friday, she said. 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up. I'll meet you, she said. Not a rejection, a correction. She held his eyes to make sure he understood the difference. Give me the address and I'll meet you. He understood the difference. I'll send it to you, he said. He walked back to his office. He stood at his desk and felt something that was the precise opposite of every tightly managed professional interaction he had conducted in the past 20 years, something loose and warm and slightly terrifying in the way that only genuinely good things were terrifying. He was going to have dinner with a woman he was in love with, at a small restaurant where nobody would recognize him. He was at 38 years old going on a date. The absolute absurdity of this, given everything, given the month, given the empire, and the crisis, and the 30-year grievance, and the shell companies, and the brother, struck him so completely that he stood at his desk for a full minute doing something he almost never did. He laughed, quietly to himself at his desk, with nobody watching. And it felt like something returning to him that he hadn't known he'd lost. Friday arrived with the particular quality of a day that knows it's significant. Matteo left the office at 5:30, which caused Marco to look up from his own desk with an expression of visible surprise that Matteo acknowledged with a look that ended the conversation before it started. He went home. He changed. He stood in his apartment and looked at himself in the mirror with the same steady assessment he brought to everything. And then he did something he had not done in years. He changed his jacket because the first one was wrong. He arrived at the restaurant at 6:55. It was a place on the north side, family-owned, the kind that had been in the same location for 30 years and had a menu that didn't change, and regulars who had been coming since the place opened. He had found it through a search he had conducted himself, which was itself unusual. He had not asked. Marco had not delegated the research, had simply sat on Wednesday evening and looked until he found somewhere that felt right. He was at the table when she arrived at 7:02. She walked in wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, dark green, and when she took it off, she was in something simple and deep blue, and she looked like herself. Not the professional version, not the composed executive floor version, but the version underneath that he had been catching edges of for weeks, and that in full was even more disarming than he had expected. She sat down across from him. "You changed your jacket," she said. He stared at her. "How do you... You were wearing the charcoal canali when you left at 5:30. She picked up the menu. "This is the navy one." He looked at her. "You notice everything," he said. "I've been noticing everything about you for 5 years," she said. She said it directly into the menu, and he caught the slight color in her face when she looked up. "That's either a professional habit or something else entirely." "Which is it?" he said. She met his eyes. "Something else entirely," she said. He felt the thing in his chest do what it had been doing for weeks, opening wider the continuous expansion of something that had been compressed for too long. "Good," he said. She smiled, the real one. They ordered. They ate. They talked for 2 hours, without once discussing the consolidation, the Calabrese situation, the Ferretti resolution, or anything that lived in the world of Matteo De Luca's professional life. And this was. He understood with a clarity that surprised him the most unusual thing he had done in possibly a decade. He talked about things he had not talked about with anyone. He told her about his father, not the version he gave to business contacts, or the version that appeared in the careful mythology of how De Luca International had become what it was, but the actual man. Complicated, brilliant in specific ways, and profoundly blind in others. A man who had built something extraordinary and left the people closest to him with the bill for what the building had cost. "You've been paying that bill," Livia said, "for 20 years. And Nico thought you were collecting it." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, turning her glass slowly, the way she turned her pen when she was thinking. "Have you told him that?" she said. "The bill. The way you've framed it to yourself, that you've been paying it." "Not in those words." "Tell him in those words," she said. "When he comes. Don't give him the managed version. Give him the actual thing." He looked at her. "You're going to make me have every hard conversation I've been avoiding," he said. "I'm not making you do anything," she said. "I'm just present for the ones you decide to have." A small pause. "That's different." "Is it?" "Yes." She held his gaze. "Making you do things would require me to have a different kind of authority over your life than I have." "What kind of authority do you have?" he said. She considered this. "The kind you gave me," she said. "Which is considerable, but it's different from control." She paused. "I think that's the distinction you've been figuring out. Between the two." He looked at her. "Between protecting someone and controlling them," he said. "Between loving something and owning it." The word sat in the air between them. Neither of them looked away. "Livia," he said. "I know," she said quietly. "I haven't." He stopped, started again. "I haven't said it. You don't have to say it tonight." "I want to." He held her gaze with the full weight of the attention he usually reserved for his most serious decisions. "I love you. I was going to say working toward it, but that's not right. I've been admitting it, for weeks. It was already there." He paused. "It's been there for a long time." She looked at him across the small table in the small restaurant where nobody recognized him, and where the food was exactly right, and where the light was warm, and where he was at this specific moment not a mafia boss, or a CEO, or the man his enemies had spent a month trying to dismantle. He was simply a man telling a woman the truth. She reached across the table. She put her hand over his. "I know," she said. "I love you too." Simply, directly. No performance around it, no management of the moment. "I have for a while." He looked at her hand on his. He turned his hand over and held hers. And they sat like that for a long moment in the quiet of the restaurant. And he thought about all the years he had been very good at not knowing things. He knew, and about how much had changed in a month, and about how the change had not come from a crisis or a business decision or a strategic shift. It had come from a woman's real smile at a party, and from a question he'd asked that came from somewhere true, even though he hadn't known it yet, and from a person who had sat across from him in the month since, and refused to let him be less than he actually was. "I want to tell you something," he said. She waited. "I've been thinking about what I want," he said. "What I actually want. Not the operations, not the consolidation, not the empire." He paused. "A life that has this in it. Regular dinner. Someone who tells me to eat. Someone who fixes my jacket before I know it needs fixing." He paused again. "I want to learn how to have that." She looked at him. "You already have it," she said. "I'm aware I've been slow to arrive." "You got here," she said. "That's what matters." He squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. Outside, Chicago went about its business. The traffic, the cold, the accumulated weight of a city that didn't pause for personal reckonings. Inside the small restaurant on the north side, Matteo De Luca sat across from the woman who had decided 5 years ago that this job was worth taking because she refused to be invisible, and he thought about all the ways the world had tried to use her against him, and failed, because it had fundamentally misunderstood what she was. She was not a weakness. He had known this with his professional mind for weeks. He understood it now with everything else. She was the most precise and formidable person he had ever met, and she had chosen to spend 5 years applying that precision to his world without ever asking for recognition, without ever leveraging her position, without ever being anything other than exactly what she'd said she was. On the day she interviewed the only person who walked into the building without looking nervous when they said his name downstairs. "What are you thinking?" she said. That I should have hired you sooner, he said. She laughed. The real laugh full unguarded her head, tilting back slightly. He watched her laugh. And this time, no one else was watching. This time, it was only his. You hired me the same afternoon, she said. I don't think you could have moved faster. I mean, sooner in my life, he said. Years ago, I should have... He paused. I should have had someone like you sooner. She looked at him with the warmth that had been growing and was now simply present, simply part of what existed between them. You weren't ready sooner, she said. No. Neither was I. She paused. We got here at the right time, Matteo. He thought about this. You believe that, he said, that there's a right time. I believe that the people who are supposed to find each other usually do, she said. Sometimes it just takes a stranger making them laugh at a party. He looked at her. I owe Daniel Carter an apology, he said. She laughed again, and he felt it the way it landed in his chest like something he wanted to keep hearing for the rest of his life. You absolutely do not, she said. They stayed at the restaurant until nearly 10 o'clock, which was the longest Matteo had sat in a non-operational context in years without checking his phone or recalibrating the evening toward a purpose. They walked out together into the cold night air and stood on the sidewalk in the particular way of two people at the end of an evening that neither of them wants to end. I'll see you Monday, she said. Monday, he agreed. She started to turn. He said her name, just her name, and she turned back, and he looked at her for a moment with everything he had been and everything he was becoming fully visible on his face, the management of it completely gone. This is going to change things, he said. At the office, I need you to know I understand that, and I'm not going to... He paused. I'm not going to ask you to absorb that alone. I know, she said. We'll figure it out together. We will, she said, simply, completely certain. He nodded. She smiled. She walked toward the car she'd parked 2 blocks away, and he stood on the sidewalk and watched her go. Not with the sharp, fractured feeling of the party. Not with the unfamiliar ache of wanting something he couldn't name, but with the clean, settled certainty of a man who knew exactly what he had and had decided at last to be worthy of it. He walked to his own car. He drove home. He went to sleep at 11:15, which was the earliest he had slept in possibly 10 years, and he slept without the particular quality of vigilance he usually maintained, even unconscious deeply, quietly, like someone who had finally put down something very heavy and discovered that the ground was solid underneath. The following weeks brought the particular rhythm of two people who have said the true thing and are now learning how to live inside it. At the office, nothing changed in the ways that mattered professionally. She ran his schedule with the same precision. He conducted his business with the same authority. The floor operated exactly as it had always operated, with the efficiency and calibrated tension of a world that Matteo had built and that Livia had always moved through with equal competence. But things were different in the texture of the days. He told her good morning and meant it in a specific way. She brought him coffee, and he accepted it without pretending he hadn't been waiting for her to arrive. When she pushed back on a decision, which she continued to do unilaterally and without apology, because she would not have been herself without it, he listened with a quality of openness he hadn't brought to the practice before. And she told him things. She told him about the evening she'd spent on the phone with her sister, untangling 3 years of accumulated misunderstanding about their father's estate, and how the conversation had lasted 4 hours, and ended with her sister crying, and both of them agreeing they'd waited too long. She told him about the degree she'd been putting off corporate law, which surprised him until she explained that the thing she'd always wanted was to understand the full structure of the worlds she moved through, not just the operational layer. She told him about the neighborhood she'd grown up in, and about the teacher who'd told her at 14 that she had the kind of mind that wasted itself if it didn't find the right outlet. What outlet did you find? He said. She looked at him across his desk, where they were reviewing documents that had entirely lost her attention. This, she said. Running the most complicated professional environment I could find for the most demanding person I could find. A small pause. It turns out the outlet was always going to involve you specifically. I just didn't know it yet. He looked at her. You should apply, he said, for the degree. She raised an eyebrow. I haven't decided. You have, he said. You've decided. You're just managing my reaction before you tell me. She stared at him. You've been learning to read me, she said. You've been reading me for 5 years, he said. It seemed fair to start. She looked at him with an expression that was layered and warm, and slightly undone in the way he had come to treasure, the way her composure moved aside when something reached her that she hadn't been managing for. I applied 2 weeks ago, she said. I know, he said. She stared. How? You took a longer lunch on a Thursday. You came back looking the way you look when you've done something that cost you something. You didn't mention it. The only things you don't mention are the things that matter most to you. He held her gaze. I assumed. She was quiet for a long moment. I got in, she said. I know that too, he said. Mateo. Evening program, he said. Which means your schedule doesn't change significantly, which means this works. He paused. Congratulations. She looked at him. He watched her decide not to cry, which she managed with the particular precision she brought to everything, except for the slight brightness in her eyes that she couldn't fully control. You're going to make this harder than it needs to be, she said. I'm going to make nothing harder than it needs to be, he said. That's the whole point. She looked at him for a long moment. Who are you? She said. And she meant it not rhetorically, but as the genuine question of a woman who was watching a man become someone slightly larger than the person she had thought she already fully knew. Still figuring it out, he said. Good, she said. Keep going. She stood. She was at the door when he said her name. She turned. Nico arrives next Thursday, he said. I'd like you to be there, at the dinner. He paused. Not as my secretary. She held his gaze. As what? She said. As the person who matters to me most, he said. If you're willing. She stood in the doorway of his office with the afternoon light behind her and looked at him with an expression that contained everything, all of it. The 5 years, and the party, and the Sunday phone calls, and the Saturday afternoons with the olive notebook, and the shell companies, and the dinners, and the conversations they'd had, and the ones they were still going to have. Yes, she said. Simple, direct, complete. I'll be there, she said. And she walked out. Mateo sat at his desk in the quiet that followed, and thought about what it meant to have built an empire with no one inside it who knew him, and to have been known quietly steadily without being asked by the person sitting outside his door. He thought about what it meant to stop pretending that was sufficient. He thought about what it meant to want more, and to be, for the first time in his life, unafraid of that wanting. He picked up his phone. He called Nico. Thursday, he said. I need to tell you about someone. A pause. Then carefully, someone important. Mateo looked out at his floor. Through the glass, he could see Livia at her desk notebook, open pen in hand, the particular quality of her focus that was as familiar to him as his own reflection. Yes, he said. The most important. End of Part 4. Part 5. Lưu ý viết 5.000 đến 5.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng, đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 5 đạt điểm 10 trên 10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi ai. Kẻ theo ngôi thứ 3 giữ độ kịch tính, không viết lằn mặn. Kết thúc dùng câu khẳng định mạnh để khép lại câu chuyện rõ ràng. trọn vẹn. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mục document mới. 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đất 10 đến 15 mini climax. Mỗi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút, có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn, tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show more. Part 5. The Smile. He waited years to see. Nico DeLuca arrived on a Thursday evening which was deliberate. Matteo had chosen Thursday specifically because it gave them Friday if the dinner went long, and the weekend if it went badly, and he had learned in the past month to plan for the possibility that things could go badly without assuming they would. He was at the restaurant before Nico arrived. The same north side place, the same table near the back, the same warm light. He had not told Nico it was the same place he'd taken Livia. That detail was not relevant to this conversation and would have been the kind of layering that complicated things before they'd had the chance to simplify. Nico walked in at 7:04 and looked exactly like what he was, a younger version of a man Matteo saw in his own mirror, carrying the same jaw and the same posture and the same quality of wariness that the DeLuca name seemed to install in everyone who bore it, but softer. Nico had always been softer. Matteo had spent 20 years trying to decide whether that was something to protect or something to regret, and he had never fully resolved it. They shook hands first. Then, and this surprised Matteo, though he managed not to show it, Nico pulled him into a brief tight embrace that lasted approximately 3 seconds and felt like the resolution of something that had been suspended for years. "Brother," Nico said. "Sit down," Matteo said. His voice was even. It required some effort. They sat. For the first few minutes, they covered the surface things: the flight from Milan, the hotel, the weather, the particular neutrality of two men who have a great deal to say and are finding the angle of entry. Matteo ordered for both of them from memory because he knew what Nico liked, and Nico looked at him when he did it with an expression that was difficult to read. "You still remember," Nico said. "I remember everything about you," Matteo said. That was never the problem. Nico was quiet. "What was the problem?" he said. Not aggressively, genuinely. Matteo set down his water glass. He thought about Livia's instruction. Tell him in those words, the actual thing, not the managed version. And he thought about the fact that he had spent a month learning how to have hard conversations, and that this was simply the next one. "I made decisions about your life without including you in them," he said. "For 20 years. I told myself it was protection. I told myself the world we were born into was something I could stand between you and..." He paused. "What I actually did was treat you like something that needed to be managed instead of someone who deserved to be told the truth." Nico looked at him. "The property situation," Nico said. "I could have explained it at any point in 3 years," Matteo said. "I didn't because explaining it required admitting that Father's estate was structured in a way that was unfair to you, and admitting that required me to acknowledge that I let it stand longer than I should have because changing it was complicated, and I was handling other things." He held his brother's gaze. "That wasn't acceptable. I'm telling you now." The restaurant moved around them. Other tables, other conversations. The ordinary texture of a Thursday evening, and at their table, something was happening that had not happened between the DeLuca brothers in 20 years. They were being honest. "Ferretti told me you'd done it deliberately," Nico said. "The estate structure. He said you'd engineered it." "I know. Part of me believed him. I know that too." Matteo paused. "The part that believed him wasn't wrong to be suspicious. I had given you reasons to be suspicious. I just hadn't given you the actual truth to measure the suspicion against." Nico looked at his hands, then looked up. "Who is she?" he said. Matteo went still. "I told you I wanted to tell you about someone," Matteo said. "You said she was the most important," Nico said. "I've been thinking about that since Thursday. You've never called anyone the most important." A pause. "Not in 38 years. "No," Matteo said. "I haven't." "So who is she? Her name is Livia Romano, Matteo said. She's been my executive secretary for 5 years. She's brilliant and she's direct and she doesn't manage me and she doesn't perform anything and she rebuilt a 30-year corporate intelligence trail on a Saturday afternoon because she had time. He paused. And she told me to call you. Both times. Nico stared at him. Both times, he said. The first call, when I told you about Ferretti. Matteo looked at him steadily. She told me to call you instead of handling it around you. She said you deserved to know you'd been used. A pause. She was right. Nico was quiet for a long moment. I want to meet her, he said. She's coming for dessert, Matteo said. Nico stared at him again. Then, something happened on his face that Matteo had not seen in many years. His brother smiled. A full, genuine, slightly startled smile, the kind that arrived when something surprised you into it. You planned it, Nico said. You brought her in for dessert so we'd have the hard conversation first, without the social pressure. Yes. That's... Nico shook his head. That's very you. Is that a criticism? No. Nico was still smiling. No, it's actually... He paused. It's you, Matteo. It's you trying. I can see that it's you trying, and that's different from before. Matteo looked at his brother. I'm learning, he said. From her. Partly. A pause. From the month we just had. From a lot of things that happened very fast. He held Nico's gaze. But partly from her, yes. Nico nodded slowly. The estate, he said. Let's fix it. My attorney will call yours Monday, Matteo said. We'll restructure it the way it should have been from the beginning. Just like that. It should have been just like that 3 years ago, Matteo said. I'm not going to make it complicated now. Nico looked at him for a long moment. Okay, he said. Just okay, simple, final. The closing of a door that had been stuck open and letting in cold air for 3 years. They ate. They talked not about operations, not about business, but about the things brothers talk about when they have finally located each other again after years of careful distance. About their father and the specific ways he had loved them badly, and the specific ways he had also, in his complicated and costly fashion, loved them. About Milan, and what Nico's life there had become, and about Chicago, and what Matteo's life there looked like to someone who hadn't been close enough to see it clearly. At 8:45, Livia arrived. Matteo saw her. Before Nico did. She came through the door in a coat. He recognized the dark green one, and she found him across the room immediately in the way she always found him in rooms, the particular navigation of someone who had calibrated to his presence over years without being conscious of it. Nico turned to follow his eye line, and Matteo watched his brother see Livia Romano for the first time, watched Nico take in the way she moved through the restaurant, the quality of her attention, the specific combination of warmth and directness that she carried, and watched something register on Nico's face that looked very much like understanding. She reached the table. Matteo stood. Livia, he said. My brother Nico. Nico. She extended her hand, looked at him directly, and smiled, the real smile, not the professional one, the one that had started everything. I've heard a great deal about you. Nico took her hand. He looked at her. Then he looked at Matteo. She's the reason you called, he said, not a question. She's the reason for a lot of things, Matteo said. Nico looked back at Livia with an expression that was open and slightly awed and entirely genuine. Thank you, he said, for whatever you said to him. Livia looked at Matteo. I told him to eat dinner and call his brother. She sat down. He did both eventually. Nico laughed, and Matteo sat down across from his brother and the woman he loved in a small restaurant where nobody recognized him and felt the specific quality of a life that was becoming something worth having. The year that followed moved with a different rhythm than any year before it. The consolidation completed successfully. The Bruni partnership returned better margins than either party had projected. The Calabresi resolution finalized in February, with terms that Aurelio Calabresi described in a phone call to Matteo as more than he had expected and less than 20 years of conflict deserved, which Matteo took as the closest thing to grace that situation was going to produce. Elena, as Livia had theorized, turned out to be Aurelio's daughter-in-law, a woman named Elena Benedetti Calabresi, who had married into the family 12 years earlier and had watched the Ferretti operation develop with the slow horror of someone who understood what it would cost everyone when it finished. She had made one phone call to a number she'd obtained through the most careful possible research and changed everything. Matteo sent her flowers with a note that said, only, "Thank you for the different choice." She sent back a single line. "Someone has to make it first." He put the note in his desk drawer and left it there. Livia started the evening law program in January. She navigated it with the same efficient precision she brought to everything fitting coursework into the structure of her life, without allowing it to fracture anything else. She was, her professor told her after the first month, the most prepared student in the cohort. She didn't tell Matteo this. He found out from a completely separate source which he did not explain, and when he mentioned it, she looked at him with an expression that was simultaneously exasperated and warm. "You have people everywhere," she said. "I have one person," he said, "who happened to be present for the comment." "Who? Irrelevant." He held her gaze. "You're the best in your cohort." "It's only been a month." "Yes," he said, "and you're already the best." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away, and he caught the slight brightness in her eyes that she would never fully allow into a full expression, the one that arrived when something reached her that she hadn't been managing for. "Stop," she said. "No," he said. She laughed. He had become very good at making her laugh. He had not known before this year that this was a skill he possessed, or that possessing it would feel like the most significant professional development of his life. But there it was, the specific knowledge of what would reach her, what would catch her off guard, what would produce the unguarded laugh that had started everything a year ago. And that still, every single time, did something to his chest that he no longer had any interest in managing. Nico came to Chicago 3 more times over the course of the year. The first visit was business. The estate restructuring required his presence for 2 days of meetings that were compared to 3 years of accumulated resentment, almost embarrassingly straightforward to resolve. On the second day, Nico had dinner with Livia alone, which Matteo had not engineered, and which he was not entirely comfortable with until Nico came back from it and said simply, "She told me something about you that I didn't know." "What?" Matteo said. "That you've been sorry for years," Nico said. "You just didn't have the words." Matteo looked at his brother. "She said that," he said. "She said it in a way that made it sound like it was obvious," Nico said. "Like I should have been able to see it." He paused. "I couldn't see it. But I believe her." Matteo said nothing. "She's good for you," Nico said. "I mean that technically not just she's actually good for you. She fills in the parts where you go wrong." "I know," Matteo said. "Do you tell her that?" He thought about all the ways he had learned to tell her things in the past year, not in long prepared statements, but in the continuous small practice of it, the daily accumulation of honesty that was the only real architecture of trust. "Yes," he said. "I'm learning." The second visit was a personal. Nico brought someone. A woman named Sophia who worked in architecture and had a laugh that was slightly too large for most rooms, and who looked at Nico the way that people look at someone when they've stopped pretending they're not in love with them. Matteo liked her immediately and said so, which surprised Nico visibly. "You don't usually," Nico started. "I'm working on that," Matteo said. The third visit was for an event. 1 year after the company party, where everything had broken open and changed direction, Rosa Gentile organized another celebration. She came to Matteo's office in October with the same determination she'd brought 12 months earlier, and she sat across from his desk and said, "Annual company event. Same venue. I need your approval." Matteo looked at her. "Same venue," he said. "It's the best event space in the loop, and our contract gives us preferred pricing." Rosa looked at him evenly. "Is there a reason we shouldn't go back?" Matteo thought about a room where he had stood with a scotch he hadn't finished, and watched a woman laugh and felt something crack open in his chest. "No," he said. "Book it." Rosa booked it. The weeks leading up to the event had a particular quality that Matteo observed with the attention of someone who had learned over the course of a year to pay attention to the things he'd previously catalogued as unimportant. He noticed that Livia was quieter than usual in the days before, not troubled. Quiet, not the compressed quality of someone managing something difficult, but thoughtful quiet. The kind that meant she was holding something she was deciding what to do with. He didn't ask. He had learned that too, when to ask and when to wait, and that waiting was sometimes the most respectful form of attention. 3 days before the event, she came into his office without being called and sat down across from his desk and looked at him with an expression that was open in the particular way he'd come to treasure. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "Tell me." "Last year," she said. "The party, when you came across the room." He waited. "I've been thinking about what it cost you," she said. "To do that, to say what you said even the way you said it. You didn't know what it was yet, but you crossed the room anyway." She paused. "That took more than I gave you credit for at the time." He looked at her. "Why are you telling me now?" he said. "Because we're going back to the same room," she said. "And I wanted you to know that I understand what that night was. Not just what it became, but what it was in the moment." She held his gaze. "You were terrified, and you crossed the room anyway." He was quiet. "Yes," he said. "I love that about you," she said. Simply. Completely without performance. He looked at her across the desk that had been between them for 6 years, and thought about the word she'd just used, and how she said it not in the charged, weighted way of a declaration, but in the easy, settled way of someone for whom it was simply true as the morning calendar, and the olive notebook, and the coffee she still brought him, and the directness she still applied to everything, without apology. "I love you," he said. In the same register, the same easiness. The thing that had been enormous and frightening a year ago, worn now into something he could carry without effort, because he had been carrying it every day. She smiled. "I know," she said. "Go back to work." He went back to work. The night of the event arrived clear and cold, the particular quality of a Chicago November, that was different from the November before, only in the specific ways that a year of change makes a familiar thing unrecognizable. Matteo arrived at 7:45, same time, same building. He shook the required hands, said the required things, and found that the required things required less effort than they had before, that there was something in him that was less compressed this year, less vigilant, some portion of his attention that had been permanently allocated to holding the perimeter of himself, and had been released to something else. He accepted a glass of something and found a position near the east side of the room and looked out at 200 people, and thought about what it meant to have brought them to this moment. Not just the business, not just the operational architecture, but this specific gathering of people who were employed by something he had built, who had lives that intersected with his life, who went home to families and difficulties and small joys that he had never thought to ask about before this year. He thought about asking more. He was thinking about this when Marco appeared at his shoulder. "Nico just arrived," Marco said. Matteo looked toward the entrance. Nico was there with Sophia beside him, and they were talking to someone near the door, and Nico looked comfortable in a way that he had not looked at any DeLuca International event in years, comfortable the way of someone who was present by choice rather than obligation. He caught Matteo's eye across the room and lifted his chin slightly. Matteo lifted his in return. It was not in the language of their family a small thing. He turned back to the room, and that was when he saw Livia. She came in at 7:58, slightly later than she'd planned, he knew, because she'd told him her cab had gotten caught behind an accident on Wacker and she was in Burgundy again. Different dress, same color. He wondered if she'd chosen it deliberately and decided she probably had, because Livia Romano chose everything deliberately, and the deliberateness was one of the things. She found him across the room before she'd finished walking in. The same navigation, the same calibration. He didn't move. He let her come to him. She crossed the room with the particular quality she had always brought to movement, purposeful, unhurried, not performing arrival, but simply arriving. And she stopped in front of him and looked at him with everything clear on her face, none of it managed. "Same room," she said. "Same room," he agreed. "You look less like you want to break something," she said. "I felt less like I wanted to break something," he said. "A year ago I stood here and felt something I didn't have a name for and didn't know what to do with. And now? Now I know exactly what it was," he said, "and exactly what to do with it." She looked at him. What was it? He held her gaze with the full weight of the past year. All of it. Every conversation, and every hard thing, and every dinner, and every Saturday afternoon, and every moment he had been slowly becoming someone worthy of being known. "Fear," he said. "For the first time in my life, I was afraid of losing something that mattered more than everything else." He paused. "I just didn't know yet that it was you." She was very still. "You know now," she said. "I know now," he said. He took her hand. Right there, in the same room in front of 200 people, most of whom had spent years carefully calibrating their understanding of who Matteo De Luca was and what he did and did not feel. He took her hand, and he held it, and he didn't let go. A year ago, he had crossed the room and asked her if she was enjoying someone else's attention. Tonight, he was not asking anything. He was simply telling the truth by holding her hand in public, which was for a man who had spent 38 years keeping the most important things invisible, the most radical act available to him. She didn't pull away. She held his hand back with the same steady completeness she brought to everything fully, without reservation, without management. Around them the party moved. People noticed. People adjusted their understanding with the quick recalibration of professionals who are good at incorporating new information. Rosa Gentile across the room clocked it in approximately 3 seconds and looked away with the satisfied expression of someone who had suspected something for a year and was now confirmed. Marco near the bar looked at them for a moment and then went back to his drink. Nico from across the room caught Matteo's eye again and smiled. Not the cautious smile. Not the careful smile of brothers who have spent years miscommunicating. The full, genuine, deeply relieved smile of a man who was watching his brother be happy for what might have been the first time. Matteo looked back at him. Then he looked at Livia. "A year ago," he said, "I asked you something." She looked up at him. "You asked if I was enjoying his attention. I was wrong about why I asked," he said. "I thought I was angry. I told myself it was instinct. Protective instinct, professional instinct, any instinct that wasn't the one it actually was." He paused. "I was afraid. Because in that moment I understood without knowing that I understood it, that your smile mattered to me more than anything I had ever controlled." She was very still. "Matteo, I spent 5 years pretending I wasn't watching you," he said. "I spent 5 years filing everything you said and everything you did into the professional category because the alternative was something I didn't have the vocabulary for yet." He looked at her directly, completely, without the management of anything. "You gave me the vocabulary, the whole year. Every conversation, every dinner, every time you told me to eat something, and every time you told me I was wrong, and every time you sat across from me and waited for me to arrive at something in my own time without pushing." He paused. "You gave me the words for the things I've always been." She looked at him with eyes that were bright and present, and not performing steadiness, genuinely steady. Because she was genuinely steady, because she had always been the steadiest person in any room she entered. "You were always those things," she said quietly. "I didn't give them to you. You just finally let someone see them." "You," he said. "You specifically. Me specifically. she agreed. He raised their joined hands, slightly a small gesture, not dramatic, simply present. I need to tell you something, he said. In front of everyone in this room, because I have spent my entire adult life keeping the most important things invisible, and I'm done with that. She looked at him. Matteo. Her voice was soft. What are you doing? Something I should have been doing for a long time, he said. He turned slightly so that the room was to his back, and she was fully in front of him. Not a performance for the audience, but a declaration of direction of where his attention lived, of what he was facing. I love you, he said. At full volume, which in his particular vocal register was not loud, but was clear, completely clear, with no ambiguity about who it was intended for. I have loved you through the worst month of my professional life, and through a year of learning how to be a person who deserves to be loved back. I am not done learning. I will probably still be learning when I'm very old. He paused. But I know what I want. I know who I want it with. And I'm not going to spend another year not saying it out loud. The room was very quiet. 200 people in the same space that had held this story at its beginning, and the room was quiet in the particular way of people who are witnessing something real and have enough sense to stay still for it. Livia looked at him. Her composure, the beautiful, precise, impeccable composure that she had brought to every crisis and every conversation and every moment in 6 years, wavered. Just slightly. Just enough for something entirely unmanaged to show through for a single unguarded moment before she gathered it back. You are, she said, and her voice was not entirely even. The most complicated, most difficult, most... She stopped. Started again. For a man who runs an empire, you have absolutely terrible timing. I know, he said. We're at a company event. I know. There are 200 people watching us. I know, he said. I don't care. She stared at him. And then she did something that he would remember for the rest of his life. She put her free hand against his chest, right over the center of it, and looked at him with everything clear on her face, and she said, You should have been this much of a disaster from the beginning. It would have saved us both a lot of time. He felt the laugh arrive before he could prepare for it, the same genuine, unguarded laugh that she had pulled out of him in his office months ago, the one that felt like returning to something he'd lost. Probably, he said. I love you, she said, directly, completely, to his face in front of 200 people with her hand on his chest and her eyes fully open. I have loved you for most of the time I've known you, and I spent a very long time being very professional about it, and I'm... She paused. I'm done being professional about it. Good, he said. Don't make it complicated, she said. I won't, he said. He pulled her toward him, and she came, and in the same room where a year ago he had stood with a scotch he hadn't finished and watched her laugh at something someone else said. Matteo De Luca held Livia Romano and understood completely, without any remaining ambiguity, what the rest of his life was going to be organized around. Not the empire. Not the consolidation. Not the operations or the alliances or the careful architecture of power that he had been building since he was 19 years old. Her. Around them someone started clapping Rosa. It was probably Rosa, and then more people. The warm, generous applause of 200 people who had spent years calibrating their understanding of a man who didn't show them anything, and who were now being shown something they had not expected, and that was simply true. Nico whistled from across the room. Sophia pulled his arm and laughed. Marco near the bar raised his glass once, then looked away. Livia pulled back slightly and looked up at him with the real smile, the one that had started everything, the one that had broken something open in him a year ago in this room. The one that he had since discovered she had been directing at him for years, in small controlled measures that he had been too close to fully receive. For a mafia boss, she said, you're terrible at timing and impossible to predict. He looked at her. Only with the person who matters most, he said. She shook her head. But she was smiling, and he was smiling. And the most feared man in Chicago, who had spent 38 years keeping every important thing invisible, stood in a room of 200 people and smiled at the woman who had always seen him and didn't look away. Afterward, they stayed until the last guests left. Not because they had to. Not because there was anything operational requiring their presence. Because they were comfortable. Because the room held something now that it was worth staying inside. Because Nico had come over with Sophia, and the four of them had talked for an hour in the unforced, easy way of people who are discovering that they fit together. And it had been the most ordinary and most extraordinary thing Matteo had experienced in as long as he could remember. When the room emptied and the staff began the quiet work of breaking down the evening, Matteo and Livia were the last ones at the bar, with 2 glasses of something neither of them had been drinking and the whole expanse of the empty room around them. She was sitting on a bar stool with her heels off and her olive notebook on the bar. She had brought it to the event, which was so completely her that he had felt something tender and amused when he'd spotted it in her bag, and she was writing something. "What are you writing?" he said. "Tomorrow's calendar," she said. "You have a 9 o'clock that's going to run long, and I need to build in a buffer." He stared at her. She looked up. "What?" "We just..." He gestured at the empty room. "I know what we just did," she said. "The 9 o'clock still exists." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took the notebook very gently out of her hands. She raised an eyebrow. "The 9 o'clock," he said, "can wait until Monday." She looked at him. "It's a Thursday," she said. "Then it has 4 days," he said. She studied him. "Who are you?" she said. Again, the same question she'd asked months ago, the same genuine wondering of someone watching a man expand into a larger version of himself. "Still finding out," he said. "Good," she said. The same answer. "Keep going." He put the notebook on the bar. He took her hand. They stayed in the empty room for another half hour, talking about nothing significant and everything important, the way that people do when they have finally arrived somewhere they've been working toward for a long time and can afford to simply be there. Outside Chicago went about its permanent indifferent business. The traffic, the cold, the accumulated momentum of a city that did not pause for the private reckonings of the people inside it. But inside that room, in the specific quiet of an evening that had held its beginning and its resolution in the same space, something was fully complete. A woman who had refused to be invisible had walked into the most complicated job she could find, and had spent 5 years seeing the person underneath the power, and had waited with the complete patient steadiness of someone who understood that the right things came to the people who were honest enough to want them. For the person she'd always known was there to finally show up. And a man who had spent 38 years keeping the most important things invisible had crossed a room because a woman laughed and had followed that crossing all the way to here, to an empty room and a held hand, and a future that looked nothing like the one he had been building alone. He had thought once that power meant making people afraid. He understood now completely and without reservation that power was this, the specific courage of being fully known by someone who chose to stay anyway. Livia Romano had seen him from the beginning. Matteo De Luca had finally irrevocably learned how to let her. And that was enough. That was everything. That was the whole truth of it, simple and absolute and entirely complete.